Long days, pleasant nights, and welcome to Kingslingers, a Doof Media podcast journeying through Stephen King's Dark Tower series and beyond. I am your host, constant reader Scott Daly, and I'm joined, as always, by my blood brother, my co-loser, my friend for life, Mr. Matt Freeman. How's it going today, Matt?
It's going well. Really, you really had to cut me real deep with that glass bottle, huh?
Yeah, man. It's like a Scream.
Yeah.
You cut me,
Okay.
cut me too deep, man.
Yeah.
I'm getting woozy here. Hey, you get it. You get these references now. I'm so happy about that.
I do. I'm finally part of American pop culture.
This week on our show, it is time for our overview episode where we take a final look at Stephen King's It. We will be in just a second here joined by Kim C from the Year of Underrated Stephen King podcast for that conversation. It's through the magic of editing, Matt, that conversation has already occurred actually. So we can hear at the very beginning of the show say that it's awesome and not be lying through our teeth. It is actually great. We had a wonderful time chatting with Kim, and I think you folks are going to really enjoy it.
Yeah, it was great. Go check out Kim's podcast. We'll say all that stuff in a minute. Yeah.
So we're going to do that, and then we're going to wrap everything up with our mailbag section as usual. We got a few great questions that we're going to go through really quick at the very end of the show, and then we're going to be done with Stephen King's It. Well, the book at least. We'll move on to some movies after this.
All right, sounds awesome.
But really quick before we get with Kim, we just wanted to give you folks a couple of announcements. We mentioned last week was kind of our official announcement of our Kingslingers live event this summer in Bangor, Maine on the 15th of June. This wonderful, wonderful event sponsored by SK Tours is happening, and tickets are going on sale next month on the 16th of November. We mentioned all this last week. We wanted to mention it again this week, and we're going to mention it every week until those tickets go on sale. But this week we did want to let you folks know that we did stand up a webpage for it. So you can head to www.doofmedia.com/Kingslingers Live, all one word. We will put a link to that in the show notes as well. And that will give you all of the details of the event, the pricing, the time, all of it will be there. And also it will have a link to our ticketing site where you will buy the tickets. The link, of course, doesn't work right now, but it will in just a few short weeks. So that's, once again, doofmedia.com/Kingslingers Live, where everything and all questions you have about this event will be answered. Probably. If you have any other questions, though, you can reach out to us.
Yeah. What's that date again when the tickets go on sale, Scott? What's that date?
The tickets go on sale on the 16th of November. That is our live sale date. Of course, we are giving our patrons, our current patrons at the time, a 2-day head start. 48 hours earlier on the 14th of November is when those tickets will open for our patrons. So if you are, concerned about things selling out, it's a great time to join our Patreon. And I just want to say, the response to this event has been incredible, including those of you who clearly wanted the advantage that Patreon gives you, because we've had a lot of new patrons in the last week, and that's awesome to see. Thank you so much. We appreciate you guys supporting us, and we're glad you're really excited about this trip, because so are we.
Yeah, and once again, we want to thank SK Tours of Maine for sponsoring this event.
Yeah, they are basically providing half of the tours that are on there for free to us. So that's a huge amount that's going to help us. We're obviously, tickets are going to cost money, and we're having you guys pay for it to help us with the expenses, but any amount of money we make over the expenses is going to be donated to the Bangor Public Library, and they are very excited about that, and that's why they're helping us out and sponsoring the event. So it's going to be great. Tons of people in Bangor that we've been talking to are pretty excited as well. So I wish it was June already. But it's going to be some fun stuff.
Yep.
One other quick announcement. The poll for our long awaited Do the King Thing contest is going to be up in a week. On the 31st of October is when the poll will close. And so if you are a patron right now and have not voted in that contest, read those 4 finalists and picked your favorite, please go do that now. We have a bunch of new patrons, so if you folks joined and didn't know about that, just go to patreon.com/doofmedia, scroll down just a few posts, and you will see the post for that it has the link to those 4 stories, and then you vote for which one you like the best, and that will help us crown a winner finally at last.
Yep.
Over a year later, we're finally going to get our winner on that one.
Yeah, I'm excited to see who's going to win.
Yeah, me too. And then, of course, I think we will do our traditional. I say traditional. We did this once before, but we will do some fun readings of those stories and do an episode chatting about them real quick as a little bonus treat.
Yep.
All right, that is it for announcements. So let's get into it, Matt. Let's pass it off to past me, who will now splice in here with our conversation with Kim C about it. All right, so we are here today with Kim C from the wonderful podcast that I can't listen to the 2 most recent episodes on, and it's driving me crazy. The underrated the year of underrated Stephen King podcast. It's a mouthful of a title, but it's such an amazing show. Kim, thank you so much for joining us. We're so happy to have you on.
Oh my gosh, I'm so happy to be here. Thank you guys.
So before we get into it, which is our main topic of the day, I just wanted to talk to you briefly about your podcast, because as we mentioned, it is the year of underrated Stephen King podcast. By my calculation, only one phrase in that is still technically correct, which is the Stephen King part, because you've been going longer than a year, right? And you occasionally cover books that are perhaps properly rated.
Yes, it's it's such an odd little duck. I started it during COVID with the intention of, we're doing it. I had been thinking about it for such a long time, and I was like, this is gonna be the year. This is gonna be it. And so after year 2 and 3 passed, I was like, maybe we should adjust. And I thought, no, because what if whoever finds the show, what if it's their year?
Yeah.
So it's kind of stuck. It's lucky. We're just going to roll with it. But yeah, it's a little baby born out of COVID lockdown, as a lot of things were. And I was having such fun and making friends. I decided to keep going with my one-woman book report show, showcasing beautiful Stephen King writing found in the shadows and making friends along the way.
Yeah, I love it. I mean, underrated is like one of my favorite words, because like, you know, I hate the word overrated. It's so mean, and you're not even being critical of the thing. You're just being critical of someone's enjoyment of the thing. But underrated is like, I feel like sometimes that's our job, is to highlight stuff that people maybe haven't seen before. So I think that's such a cool thing. You know, we're kind of in the season hitting all the big ones, but it's so great to see someone tackling these oft underappreciated novels, and tackling them so well, because that's something I like. The whole one woman show thing, like being on a mic by yourself for hours, that's terrifying to me. Like I think both Matt and I have individually thought of doing like our own kind of spin-off, one-off things, where we just talk about stuff that only we like, and I've always just like cowered away from it and never done it, because it's just so daunting. And you do just such a fantastic job of carrying the energy and propulsiveness of a conversation completely by yourself.
Oh, thank you guys so much. That means the world. It really does give me a bit of wind beneath my wings, because yeah, there are pretty much every episode real dark moments of the soul. Like, that's it. This is the last. I'm quitting. Johnny is a clown behind this microphone, alone in my living room. Okay, we're gonna cut our losses, Kim C. Let's do it. But no, every time I'm like, there's something I still enjoy. There's a lot of passion for King. Let's just keep it up.
Yeah. Well, I've really enjoyed the episodes I've listened to a huge amount, albeit I can only listen to so many. Although at this point, I've listened. We've now gone over so many books that it's not like I'm a King newbie anymore, right?
No.
But yeah, no, it's just great stuff. Really been enjoying it, and I look forward to being able to listen to all of it someday.
Yay!
Yeah, I'm really looking. You did just release an episode a couple weeks ago, or maybe last week. All the times running together for me, but on it, and I really wanted to listen to it, and I kind of stopped myself because I knew we had this conversation coming, and I was like, let's talk to her first, and then I can go back and listen to it, because I feel like if I listen to that podcast first, then I'm just going to be asking you questions about what you said on there like the entire time. And I said maybe it's better if we have the conversation first, and then I go back and listen. So I'm really looking forward to that. Also, I haven't read Fairy Tale. You did one episode on the one book I haven't read, so I didn't get to listen to that one either. But soon.
Oh, I'm so excited. So excited. Thank you guys for listening. That means the world. It's so appreciated.
Yeah, I mean, there's, I think Matt and I both said this to each other when we got the opportunity to talk to you a couple months ago. It was just a great conversation, like where you just immediately feel like, oh, this is our people. This is exactly like the type of conversations we like to have. And it's just like, you don't always get to experience that. And it was so great. And that's why we knew we had to have you on our show as soon as possible, which is why we made you read it all over again.
Oh, my heart is liquefying. I'm so excited. Thank you so much.
Yeah.
So before we move on to it, I wonder just what is, I guess, your favorite underrated King novel? Like, what is the one that's like the most underrated, that is the most good in your estimation?
Oh, beautiful question. It is pretty much a knockdown, drag out fight between Duma Key and Revival. I think those are with third place Rose Matter. That one is such a wild nutballs book, Rose Matter. It's repelling in a lot of ways, but anyway, that's my third choice pick. But Duma Key is just masterful gothic beach mystery that I feel I never get to talk about it with folks. They've either haven't read it or they didn't finish it, and I'm like, oh my god. That Duma Key is the one I would become a manic street preacher for. I would stand on a corner with a sign happily to praise Duma Key. So that one is probably number one. Close second, Revival.
That's great. That's great. Yeah, we will be covering Duma Key here in a few months. I think in the icy doldrums of February, we're gonna head to Duma Key, Florida, spend some time there. So that's great. I got so much flack for people for not including Revival on our list. I think Revival, I agree, was definitely underrated at the time. I think it's rising in the estimation by a lot of people. A lot more people are talking about that book than they did when it first came out. So that's really cool too. And Matt, you have nothing to say about any of these because you haven't read any of them.
I was sitting here sort of nodding politely, but like not in agreement because I have no idea. So just yes.
Soon.
Yeah.
Soon, Matt, you will know. You will go to Heron's Roost.
I can't wait. See, I'm going to be the first person for whom these books are properly rated, where my expectations are high, and so they'll just meet my expectations.
There you go. All right. Let's get into it. Let's talk it. So this was this 1,100 page book that we all just spent the last lot of our life reading, and Matt, I need to hear from you what you think overall. But first, we have to talk to our guests. So Kim, like, what is your history with it? When did you first read the book, and what do you think of it?
Oh, I love this so much. I so appreciated this homework assignment. It really sent me spiraling into the past. I read it 9 years ago, to be exact. And it was the third King title I had ever read. And everybody I asked, like, I want to read Stephen King. What do I read? This is their suggestion. Almost a dozen people kept saying, you got to read it. You got to read it. So I did. Took me 6 weeks, brick and mortar. And I remember feeling actually different after I finished it. I felt like a different person. I had experienced something so huge and I couldn't really pinpoint it. I just felt different and fell in love with this story of friendship and trauma. And so it left such a huge mark on me. So coming back 9 years later and being 9 years older myself was incredible. It was incredible. This is the most powerful tale of friendship and overcoming darkness with community. And it, oh man, this is a huge one. This is like the hugest one.
Yeah, I love that. Like, it's just the one that people always recommend, and you know, like I feel like a loser, not pun not intended. When people ask me what my favorite King book is, and I say it because it like feels like the most obvious one because like everyone says that, but I think there's a reason for that, and I think Matt, you got to kind of experience what the reason for that is over these past 16 weeks. This book is something special, and so Matt, I guess sitting here 16 months later, weeks later, not months, weeks later, you know, what overall with stepping back, not in the forest a little bit, what'd you think of it? Does it make sense that I love it so much?
Yeah, well, so that's kind of where I wanted to start. Actually, is one of the only things I knew about this book going into it is that it was your favorite book, and that definitely set some specific expectations because I know what you like and I know why you like things very, very well. And so in that regard, the book absolutely lived up to its expectations because it's like, oh, okay, well, Scott likes tightly written thematic stories with character driven plots. He likes it when there is characters who, despite their flaws, are able to be brave and strong and defeat the evil, and basically just I think it's fair to say you also like a good a well done good versus evil narrative.
Yeah.
Oh
yeah.
And it has all of that, and it's like the tightest, cleanest example of that in King. I keep saying tight as I don't want to imply that it's like short because it's not. It's tight in the sense where it all fits together and every element is sort of earned. I mean, this is the thing that we've talked about with a lot of our sort of mutual favorite things are things where even if it seems kind of shaggy, it's like even the sort of tertiary and tangential elements are all carefully selected to cohere with the theme of the work. And so in that sense, that's what I mean when I say it's tight. Like it's this, you know, torpedo of narrative energy aimed at a specific target, even if there are, you know, narrative zigs and zags along the way, they're all in service of that final destination. So yeah, I mean, it was kind of exactly hit my expectations overall as a thing. And then, you know, the fact that it's so big, you can zoom into all these different little parts of it. Like as I was reflecting, I was thinking about all these great individual pieces, like the epic rock fight, the apocalyptic rock fight, as just a set piece is like, oh, that's amazing. That's like one of my favorite things I've read in months and months. And it's just like, oh, that's just like this little piece of the book, right? So I'll pause there in my gushing and just remark, yeah, like overall, I see why this is your favorite book. I want to go back and listen to it in a more normal human fashion, because I do think like I forgot what happened in the beginning of the book by now, and that's okay. That's not a hit on the book. But I fell in love with it, and I want to sort of digest it again at a different pace.
It's wonderful to hear. I love that. And yeah, I mean, it's this thing like you and I have been talking for so long that I feel like you know me really well. And so like, I feel like you could have drawn a picture of what this book was just from me before you even read it. And that's actually, you know, Kim, I'm curious you with this too. Like this is a book that is so popular and is so well known. One of the things that Matt was kind of going through is that he went into it with a lot of knowledge, a lot of basic, broad knowledge of what this story was before he opened the book at all. And I'm wondering if that was your experience at all, like how much you knew about the story going into it, and how that did or did not, you know, affect your experience with it.
Thankfully, I didn't have too much aside from the 1990 miniseries that shaped a lot of constant readers.
Yeah.
I was a young kid and it was advertised a lot on television, the upcoming miniseries, but I was way too chicken and I wasn't allowed to watch it. But I do remember seeing the scene about Stan. Stan in the bathtub. It scared me so bad. It scared me so bad. So all I knew about it was there was a clown. There was a clown, an evil, scary clown, monstrous, and some guy kills himself in a bathtub. And that was all I had. And I had no idea the, the layers, the epic, immense time jumps. That was all new. I just thought it was kids in the 50s, monster clown, the end. So it was really wonderful when I got to read the novel and be blown away by what was going on with that.
I think it's this really interesting thing where, I mean, it makes sense that like when King novels kind of leap into the popular consciousness so much that like it's more than just the constant readers or really book obsessed people like reading them and talking about them a lot, that they really do get flattened down to like, oh, this is the one with the clown in it and this weird sewer scene, and like it just becomes these little beats and events, and I think Matt knew almost all of those going into it. But my guess here, Matt, is that really didn't affect your enjoyment or your experience with the book at all, because the book is so much more than just a series of plot events, like starting from the beginning to end.
I mean, and this is always the case with King, where he himself makes sure that you're good and spoiled by telling you what's going to happen. I mean, like we pointed out several times, we know the kids are going to survive because they're adults. So it's like that half of things is already spoiled. I guess he did, I think I felt more anxiety going into the climax than I usually do, because I feel like King usually telegraphs who's going to die, or if not who's going to die, he telegraphs the shape of the ending more than he did here. Whereas walking into the end of the novel, I was genuinely unsure how many people were going to make it out of there. I wouldn't have been altogether shocked if almost everyone died. Like, I would have been like, yeah, it happens. You gotta make some sacrifices to defeat the ultimate evil. But on the other hand, I kind of expected that not to happen. I was thinking about, Kim, you just mentioned the stand scene, which is toward the beginning, and it's like, oh wow, I haven't thought about that in weeks and weeks. But I remembered like that. Yeah, that's a hugely emotional, impactful moment, and that then caused me to think like I normally, I think for these giant King books, like The Stand, for example, I've generally liked the beginning half more than the end half. I generally feel like King is really good at building character and setting up stakes and introducing the conflict. And he's also good at, I guess the Act 2 stuff where you're bringing things, you're evolving things, right? You're evolving the arcs. And this isn't like and then it all falls off, the wheels fall off and it sucks. It's just like, and then the way he ends things is usually just like, and then things collide and it ends in a way that is, narratively logical, but not necessarily like soaringly triumphant. Like, and then sometimes he has to just like kill a bunch of characters with a bomb because he can't figure out what to do with them, for example. And I think it is the one time, or at least like the first place in terms of, it's a big book, it's a complex book, it's got a ton of characters, and then everything moves toward this ending that actually felt like cohesive and like totally satisfying.
Yeah.
Rather than kind of like, and then like there were some like we talked about last episode, there were some things that I thought would be sort of wrapped up in the denouement that weren't. But to me, like that almost like thematically worked with the book, where it's like, well, life is messy and sometimes things don't wrap up in a satisfying way. And maybe I don't think I'm like bending over backwards to excuse the book there. I think that this is actually just a feeling that I had walking out of it. Like, yeah, this is a book about life and about like the process of growing up. and sometimes a lot of stuff in life doesn't get a nice bow wrapped around it, and you just have to you just go on. You never have a sense of closure about it, and it felt more intentional, or at least I felt a desire to extend that kind of charity to the book anyway.
Sure. I love what you said about like the structure, and I think comparing it to The Stand is such a like an interesting thing to do, right? Because The Stand is a book that like I think the beginning of that book is the best part of it. Like the first third of that book is like some of my favorite King stuff ever. It's so good. And then The Stand kind of becomes, okay, well, what is the story actually going to be about? And then we kind of have to figure our way through that leading up to this big conflict that disappoints so many people. Not me, but so many people. Whereas I think the structure of this book is almost like by definition, you know what the book is going to be almost from the first page of the book. Like it's just set up in this way where it's supposed to be this big wheel where you're learning about the past while simultaneously moving forward into the future, and both of these things are turning at the same time and wrapping in on each other in a way that like you just kind of know what the structure and the story of the book is from the very, very beginning. And you know that as a reader, and I think that also benefited King, where he kind of by necessity had to know that as a writer too. So he had to maybe he didn't structure it as like people do with outlines and stuff. He's still not really that kind of writer, but he just had to kind of know where he was going because he was writing about the past and the future at the same time. And that lends to it that cohesiveness I think you were talking about in almost accidentally on purpose. Like I want to give him credit for it because he structured the book this way, but it just allows his strengths to play themselves the most while also kind of minimizing some of his plotting weaknesses that sometimes rear their head.
Mm-hmm. That I totally agree. I mean, I think the choice of narrative conceit for this story kept him on rails in a way that ended up being beneficial to the closure, to the resolution. Makes a lot of sense.
And I do think, and Kim, let me know if you agree with this. Like, it is really interesting that it is in many ways on rails, but I think even the kid stuff ends up being, if not tense in the same way of like I don't know what's going to happen, but just tense in the way of like I think he just successfully puts you in the mind of a child to where everything's kind of scary at all times, and so like it's a different kind of narrative tension, but it's still as effective of one. Like you still even if you know largely where the movement of the story is going, the minute to minute, the beat to beat, I think is still just incredibly engaging and tense, no matter what.
Very much so. Yes. Could not agree more, because on this second read through, when I'm spending time with the kids individually, I just remember how vulnerable they are,
Mm-hmm.
especially when they're not together and they're by themselves in Derry, and you realize, dang, these little babies are 11 years old.
Mm-hmm.
And yes, it's the 50s, it's not, but there's quite literal evil lurking in this town with sinister intent towards these young people. And so there is that unique tension and fear for each one of them. And of course, after 9 years, there wasn't a lot of little things I remembered about each of their stories. I remember big picture arcs, but there were moments with certain characters I'm like, what else is going to happen to this poor baby? Like, what else is going to befall them? So it really structurally, I nerd out so hard when I look at at what he does with tension and with structure. It is astonishing because, as you mentioned, King's writing, it's not indicative of this story. It's such an outlier,
Mm-hmm.
and yet it works. And there seems to be a master plan, but we know there isn't.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
It's so good.
And that's the best writing, is one that can make you think that I was planning this the entire time, but nope, I was just making it up. But if you do a good enough job, it seems like you were planning it the entire time. Yeah.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
I think a lot of that has to do with the strength of the characters here, which just going to reiterate, like, I think it's really interesting how I each of these characters feels so vivid in my mind, despite the fact that they're all sort of similar superficially, right? But like they all have their own voice, they all have their own way of thinking and seeing situations. Um, I fell in love with each of them on on their own in their own specific way, which is hard to do for that many characters. Like I can't think of any other books that had that many characters that I fell in love with. Obviously, there's books that have more characters, right? But there aren't many books that have this many characters where I felt like a deep sense of kinship and desire for them to succeed and thrive. Um, so like that struck me as a remarkable and unique thing about this book is like every one of these kids and the adults they grew into, I was just like, yeah, I'm in love with them. I'm desperately wanted them all to make it out, even though I like knew they wouldn't, which was actually genuinely sad in a way that books often aren't, because you're just like, yeah, okay, whatever, it's a story, it's not real, but King crossed that line into making them real for me.
Yeah. The sadness and tragedy that is Stan, I think, was something that stood out to me on this reread, like it had never had before. Just that, like, because he makes this one of the inciting incidents of his novel is Stan taking his life. Every moment with young Stan in the book is just tinged with this sadness to it. Like every single one. Like you're always conscious. And if you're not conscious, the book like kind of generously reminds you of this small scared boy's ultimate fate. And it just makes every little interaction, he's different from everyone else in the Losers, and the reasons why he's different are also kind of the reasons that sealed his fate in the end. But yeah, I mean, it's so tragic. It's so tragic. And I always, like, the first time I read this, I was a kid, and so like Stan, I just kind of, it's not that I didn't like him, it's just that I kind of just forgot about him. It's just like, you have all these other characters and you have their adult counterparts you keep flashing back and forth between, and so those characters are much more primarily in your mind, and I just like Stan faded to the background for me, and it was getting to revisit it this time really that just cemented like how much I loved him as a character and how sad I was about it. And I think, Matt, in maybe the first episode, you talked about how much the Stan suicide scene affected you, and like that was like that whole chapter was like your favorite chapter of that first part. And my reaction at the time was honestly surprise, not because I disagree with you or anything, but just because I was like, really, Stan like that like Stan's backstory is the thing that like, and it totally makes sense now. It totally makes sense. And I wonder if I had read this book originally as an adult, if I would have been right there with you. It's just the coming to it from the kid point of view first changed that for me a little.
Yeah, it's kind of interesting because that is where I fell in love with Stan, honestly, when he was an adult. I think for every other character, I mostly fell in love with them when they were a kid. But by that I mean specifically, like, that's when we were seeing them in a vulnerable state where you want to protect them and you empathize with their plight, and it pushes all your emotional buttons and you're like, all right, I'm on this character's side. But for me, Stan is sort of this cold and aloof character as a kid, relatively speaking, obviously. It was when it was his one chapter as an adult where I really kind of empathized with him, and I thought that was that may still be my favorite chapter, to be honest. But,
I love it. I love
nice.
it. I would never have picked that, but I love that. I love that so much. Kim, who's your? This is the impossible question. Who's your favorite loser?
Oh, I love this question so much. Funny enough, I am absolutely in love with Bill Denbrough. He is my guy. He is my guy. But this second read through, I love Mike Hanlon so much. It, like, the love for Mike exploded on this second read through, and it's just amazing what happens when you age and you return to this story, or when you read it for the first time and one of the characters just latches on really, really tight. So Bill is always forever in my heart, mostly because I think I see myself in Bill, and it's from my own childhood. I think like what Bill was afraid of was what I was afraid of as a kid, so it was way too close when I read the book for the first time. So love Bill so much, but this time around I was like, oh my God, Mike for president. Cannot praise this man enough. What an incredible character.
Matt, as the resident Bill hater, how does that make you feel?
I get it. I mean, he's clearly the hero of the story, right? He just, I'm just still mad at him. I'm not ready, right? I'm not ready for this. Yeah, no, I mean, also, look, I'm going to be honest, okay? A big part of it is that I'm kind of a Ben partisan myself.
Yeah.
So it's
Sure.
like, if you take the story as sort of a romantic competition between these two,
I got you.
he's definitely the Jacob. Sorry, I'm so sorry. And so that, that also kind of smarts, but Ben ends up with Bev in the end somehow, so it's all good.
Uh-huh. Yeah, no, I love that, and I think the ways in which we identify with each of these characters can definitely influence where how we get into them. I mean, I was reading this book the first time, like I think we talked about this on the show, Matt, but I was the kid when you played pretend games as a kid that always wanted to be the leader character because I just thought they were the coolest. Like I wanted to be Leonardo. I wanted to be the Red Power Ranger. I like the one that a lot of times people said is the least interesting, most boringest one was always the one I wanted to be. But I had this thing where I was like wanting to be Bill, but relating more to Ben and Ben's plight and like the kind of the hopeless romantic child who just doesn't think he's good enough for any of the girls he's got the crush on. Like that is just so easy to relate to. It's just like, oh yeah, that was me.
Yeah.
And so him getting the girl at the end is like Stephen King throwing us a bone a little bit.
Exactly. I had the same thought. Ben is me, so obviously. Yeah.
Ben also gets really rich too, which I love for him.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Success, fame, career.
Yeah.
He really rakes it in.
Yeah, and being an architect is just cool.
Yeah.
That actually raises a good question that I hadn't thought about in a while because it's been 16 weeks since we talked about the beginning of the book, but we had a lot of conversations at the beginning about the fact that all the losers grow up to be these incredibly successful people, with the exception of poor Mike Hamlin. And I'm curious for either of you and maybe both of you, like now that we finished the book, like is there any deeper meaning to that specific choice to make them wildly successful in their lives? What do you think?
I don't have a good answer for that. I do. Maybe I'll just riff in that direction and we'll stumble upon something. I was thinking about how I think I had a misapprehension toward the beginning of the book, which was basically like, okay, so this is going to be about these adults who have gone through these traumatic childhood experiences and it's taught them lessons. And now they're going to bring those lessons into, they're now adults. They've grown past those things and now they're going to, et cetera. And it's like, no, none of them grew past their childhood trauma. They were frozen by that childhood trauma for 27 years. They were all in complete stasis, and in fact, all the ways in which they appear to be successful are just them, like reiterating the patterns that they exhibited as children. In every case, for all of them. And it took me a long time to click to that for whatever reason. I don't know. So maybe I'm just dense, or maybe that's a common experience. I don't know.
I just think it takes the whole story for that to become clear, honestly. Okay. So yeah. So when it comes to them being successful, I guess the thought that comes to mind in that context is like it kind of doesn't matter that they were successful. Like they have worldly success, but none of them are happy because they all still are carrying the same exact burden that they had as 11-year-olds. So it's like it's inconsequential, and by pointing that out, it's like, so what that they were successful, and then it makes you think about your own life, and you're like, no matter how successful you are, you can be like, well, okay, maybe I am successful, but am I still essentially reenacting the trauma that I received as a child? Probably, right?
So yeah, I don't know if that quite answers your question, but that's what I was thinking about this last week as I was kind of digesting the book.
Yeah, it does. I mean, I think you've got the kind of the rub of it to me is that like they're specifically successful to point out that success in all the ways we traditionally measure success is meaningless and pointless when stacked up against these things that you went through and these pasts that you carry with you, that like that stuff doesn't matter. And it doesn't suggest you are a healthy, well-adjusted person who is happy in their life at all.
Mm-hmm.
Because I mean, and it is interesting to compare the rest of the losers with Mike Hamlin, because it's like he doesn't get any of the success part either, because he's, you know, the lighthouse keeper, but he's also not happy. So it's not like they got success but it didn't make them happy, and he's an example of a person who wasn't successful and therefore was happy, but he's also miserable because he's in kind of the same boat they are trauma wise, but he just doesn't, he has to live paycheck to paycheck, which really is just mean. It's just mean. but
Very mean.
but yeah, I like that a lot, and I think what you said to me is exactly the point of it.
Cool.
I like the deal with the devil narrative. I think I had that in mind as well. Like, they're locked into something. We don't quite know what it is until the very end, but they have material success, but they're all barren. So it's kind of like when you make a deal, yes, you get this shiny thing, but it's rotted wood underneath.
Mm-hmm.
And so that was something that rang out in my mind because a lot of the time when I look at King's characters, I'm looking for patterns. I'm looking for clicky things that can lodge directly in there. But yeah, I think what you guys both said is exactly correct. It's like hollow because they are in a stasis.
Mm-hmm.
So the material success doesn't even really matter, which is the true illusion.
That
Yeah.
I like that angle too a lot, though, that this idea, you know, I think we kind of talked about it a little bit last week, Matt, this idea that, you know, did they always, in order to win, did they always have to do it this way, right? You have to fight and win, flee, and then come back 27 years later and then defeat evil once and for all? Or was this truly just a error in judgment they made, or a mistake that they made, and that they're paying for the mistake throughout their lives, and in that kind of deal with devil type of paradigm there?
Mm-hmm.
I'm still not sure, honestly, like which way I prefer it, or which way I think it's supposed to be. I think it's really interesting to consider either way.
Yeah. I mean, only Stephen King knows the answer to the question. Like, could they have defeated Pennywise as children if they had just not left? You know.
Mm-hmm.
But I mean, I like the idea that it sort of takes a whole lifetime worth of a person. You know, it takes a person's whole lifetime to defeat something this powerful. I just like that on a, I don't know, narrative level.
Yeah, I think that and it plugs into the metaphor of like what this book's about, right? This book isn't about children defeating evil. That's not what it's about. This book is about children growing into adults and having to face their childhood and those things, and the good and the bad and all mixed together. So yeah, it just like it's fun to think about those kind of things, but obviously the book is crafted this way to do this very specific thing.
Sure. Okay, yeah, no. So I like that a lot. So metaphorically, it is about you go back to your hometown for a reunion with your old friends, and you realize you thought you were fine. You thought you had a successful life, and then you realize after you talk to your old friends, oh shit, I forgot all this stuff that happened,
Mm-hmm.
that I'm not over, that has actually been haunting my subconscious for 30 years, and which I need to confront. And then you all confront it together by the metaphor breaks down here, but somehow as an adult you're able to confront these things that you weren't able to confront as a child, and you were able to process them, and you're able to truly defeat them and grow beyond them using your adult mind and sort of taking responsibility for yourself in a way that you couldn't have as a child. So
Mhm.
That specific metaphor, I really like that, because it's like, yeah, no, you can't defeat your childhood demons as an 11-year-old. You
Yeah.
you cannot. Uh, so that makes a lot of sense to me, that they would need to come back as adults, even though they're, less powerful in all of the ways that we remarked on, that the children are powerful. You do have some advantages to being an adult. You have a lot more experiences. You have a lot more emotional maturity. You can contextualize things properly, and all that. So yeah, I like that. I like that.
Sure. So one of the other things I wanted to talk to y'all about, kind of switching gears a little bit, at the beginning, the structure of this season is King throughout the decades, greatest hits type of thing. We're picking one book from each decade. This is the book I picked for the 80s, and I did that, well, really because this book takes place in the 80s, and it was written in the 80s, and that, like, but I think there's something interesting, and I talked about this in the very first episode, and I kind of wanted to revisit that with both of you now that we've all read it. The idea that this book kind of serves as a culmination of King's career up until this point when he writes this book, and then perhaps even like looking into the future, like it is kind of not a culmination of his career in many ways. Even going years and years forward, like it's a type of thing. And I think what I talked about in that first episode was that, like, he needed that amount of time beforehand to kind of build up to this skill wise, and really get his themes in order. And just like, also, I think you have to be a person of a certain age to write this book. Like, he was very close to the age of the losers when he wrote this book, and I don't think that's an accident. Like, I think it was, him reflecting on things he was going through in his life as well. So I guess, what do y'all feel about that, like, as a kind of a culmination of King in a lot of ways?
Oh, yeah. This is so this is so huge.
Mhm.
For me, the 80s equals excess.
Mhm.
And we have this bloated juggernaut of greatness with the novel, but he's almost writing like he's composing music. Like, this is just a guy just letting the melody flow for pages and pages and pages with zero concern of really where it's going. He has an idea of how he wants it to sound. And so I think what's so unique about it is I've never really ever looked at his fiction like musical composition before. And I'm able to do that because we've had all of these other novels. He's got so much material success. He's sort of typecast in the horror genre. Pop culture has made him larger than life as a horror connoisseur. And so now he kind of has all that pressure and all of this notoriety. And so he just sits down and goes and
Mhm.
goes and goes and goes. But like you said, he goes inward, Scott, right? Like, he goes to his childhood in the 50s and like pulls out stuff. And I think that King was probably every single one of the losers.
Mhm.
I think that all of them are aspects of him in 7 parts.
Mhm.
And so this is just a huge mirror maze into his past, and it's personal and it's bombastic and huge. And yeah, this is a novel that gets to wrap up years and years of success and critical acclaim, critical, being shat on by by reviewers and fans. And it's almost too huge for me to wrap my brain around, and it's
Yeah.
just an excessive explode, like the 80s were. Like,
Yeah.
the 1980s were about consumerism and material excess, and this is him with his own past. And I think tying in his own sobriety journey is also part of that as well, and what was going down. Like, we're at the crescendo of substance abuse, give or take a year or two.
Mhm.
So this is all of that. It's almost too much for my brain to wrap around.
Yeah, the way you describe that is just like, I have like 70 things pinging off my head at the same time.
Yeah.
Like, because I think you're so right that this is him kind of taking on the monster story in a way that to like the monster story to end all monster stories, because I'll be like, this is going to be a culmination of every monster I ever saw in my life. We're going to do them all at once, and then I'm going to kind of move away from the monster thing for a while. I'm not going to do that anymore. And while at the same time, yes, like a love letter to his childhood. You know, you're in this phase in your life when you're, I think, in your late 30s, moving into middle age, where you're looking back on these things. And I think, like we talked about with Salem's Lot and with Derry and with these small towns of kings, he both hates these places and he loves them to death. And I think the same is true for his childhood, where he has these incredibly fond, like self-defining memories of this time in his life, while also hating a lot of it, like just remembering the horrible parts of it. And it's a really fascinating look at, like, is this what a midlife crisis looks like when you're a horror author? I kind of, right? Like, I think so. And it's really fascinating in that regard. And yeah, I mean, the excess, the too many pages, arguably, like too much stuff, too many characters, like all these things that I think every single adaptation of this has had to say, okay, we got to cut this down. We're like, it's all in there all at the same time. I love that.
Yeah, I'm just more reminding myself that this book came out a year before the drawing of the three, which is and I think, Kim, you were the one who pointed this out in our conversation. I think you used the word excess to describe that book, where it's like, yeah, it's this Western science fiction gangster, just weird, amazing, fun ride is what I've called it several times. And yeah, so it definitely fits into that as just he is taking all of the brakes off and just seeing where you can go with novel as an art form. That's interesting. I like that a lot.
Yeah, no, that's fantastic. And I think this is it just remains my favorite of everything he's done. Like, I love so many of his books so much. We have so much more we get to talk about here in the next year, but there's something absolutely special about this one in so many ways, and I think we've highlighted some of those for sure. So Kim, one of the things I definitely wanted to talk to you about, and I think whenever we talk about it, we have to talk about, is that scene, the scene.
Oh yes. oh yes, sir.
And so like we Matt and I spent some time talking about it last week, and I think I was happy with the way our conversation went. I was happy with that. But I'm just curious, kind of what your reaction to the scene was. Again, I come at this as a person who read this when I was a kid, and so it just didn't seem like that big of a deal to me at the time. So I'm just curious, that sequence in particular, and then maybe even just talking about Bev and how this book deals with Bev and characterizes Bev and writes about Bev. I'm curious what your thoughts of that are.
Why, yes. Oh my goodness. It's such a challenge, isn't it? Okay. So when I first read the scene 9 years ago, I just remember being like, WTF? Like, what is like, it's shocking. It is shocking. It's shocking. It's kind of out of nowhere. And then for weeks after I thought about it, because I was trying to crack the code, I was convinced there had to be a reason. And my reason was, they had to sacrifice everything in order to escape the sewers and sort of defeat Pennywise, kind of. And they had to sacrifice childhood, and sex is the ultimate sacrifice of childhood. Once you have sex, you're no longer a child. And so I went with that for several years. Like, there was some sort of price to be paid, some sort of toll they had to pay in this crazy, otherworldly, paranormal sewer adventure. Reading the scene a second time, I was dreading it. It came, and then I was like, okay, just tunnel vision yourself. And then all I could think of was, this is so unnecessary. This is just so not needed. Because we've got 11-year-olds, which, yes, it's physically possible to have sex as an 11-year-old, unfortunately so. But we really don't have sexuality explored in the novel with our characters. They're not prepubescent enough for it to work. You
Yeah.
know, with Beverly, segueing to Beverly, it's always about Beverly's body, right?
Mhm.
Unfortunately, she is sexualized in the narrative. It's just sadly kind of how it is, but I don't necessarily fault it for that, because Beverly is kind of the center female in this group of boys. She is kind of an awakening figure to all of them. There is a love for her. There's a kind of veneration for her in the narrative as being this symbol of blossoming female sexuality, or I don't know, this just lovely. She's very, very Susan Delgado for me, guys. Like, she's really archetypal as our maiden, our innocent maiden who's kind of like the princess in the tower, is kind of how I looked at Bev this second read through. But I was irritated at the end of the second read through of this scene, because I'm like, this is so left field. We don't have sexuality explored in the book. Like, nobody gets erections. There's no wet dreams. There's no masturbation. There's not even, I don't know if there's even talk of like pinups or like porno mags or anything like that. There's just not a lot of sexuality in this narrative for any of the kids. And so I'm like, how did we go from like practically 0 to 180, a graphic sexual scene where one person's receiving all the sex? Like, why aren't they all having sex with each other? Like, what? Like, and I hate that King has, I love / I hate that we have to have this discussion. Like, you know, like, I'm
Yeah.
just,
Mm-hmm.
and so my one thing with this second read through is like, I think he really likes the analogy of doing it. And we have that in the scene where he's like, doing it. And did you do it? I have a feeling he just liked how that worked together and smashed it in. But it doesn't seem like Beverly's character to do what she did, which is to invite all these boys to have sex with her. Where was that in her character? Where was that? I understand. And what's difficult is I can be an apologist for the text, because they're in the sewer, it's dark, they're lost, and then it comes to her. Oh, our togetherness is fading, which I have a problem with. Like, what do you mean? You're lost, so your togetherness is fading? Like, this is getting blurry here, folks. Like, so it's just so difficult. I feel like I wrestle a bear every time I have to wrestle this wild animal in the forest to make sense of this. So, to put it succinctly, I'm not crazy about how Beverly is sexualized in the text. However, to counteract it, I understand. I understand what she represents. And she's kind of larger than life as a symbol more than a character for me. But in terms of this scene, I just don't know why. I don't get it, guys. I don't understand.
I think I see what he was trying to do, and I think where I'll kind of meet you halfway in what you're saying, at least, is like, I don't know that he was super clear and successful in communicating that or succeeding at what he was trying to do there. Like the basic strokes of it. So what I would say, but by the way, my approach is just like, yeah, what you said, totally valid. My perception was this, right? I'm not like arguing with you.
Sure.
It's like Bev is very often sort of seen as this object of adoration, occasionally mild lust by the other boys, and that's because King is a thing that he does often, actually, is he tries to channel the authentic experience of being a young boy in many of his books. And so, yeah, being in love with, having a really intense crush on a girl is a thing that he communicates in the text. And it's like, okay, well, he's trying to be responsible. He's trying to be more complex about this. So he's like, well, I'm going to also have the girl character that they're all obsessed with actually be like a person and have her own agency. And the thing I'm going to do with her is I'm going to have her take control of her sexuality. And that's what this is. Or that's what this is trying to be. And I don't know if it's totally successful. And I agree with you there. But do you at least agree, or do you see that as what he's trying to do? Or
I do.
Okay.
I do see that. And I think you're correct. There is agency there, especially in the pleasure she receives, in the comfort she receives, in the love she feels for all of them. So yes, I do agree. I think that that is present. I just think if we would have had Beverly owning or exploring her sexuality earlier in the text, I would have no problems with the scene. I mean, I would have problems, but I would maybe have less problems.
I do think that's a really fantastic point that I don't think I've ever really thought about. You know, Stephen King writes about horny boys all the time, and it's not that there's no horny boys in this book. It's just he's really rather tame with it actually through most of the book. Like none of the losers really, like outside of Ben and his kind of like boyishly charming love of Bev, and then like I think Richie gets a couple moments where he's like feels a little bit something, you know, in his belly. Like there's definitely an opportunity where he could have really like just went into that in a lot more detail, and that it maybe would have made this as you said kind of 180 a little bit less shocking when like, you know, we're thinking about these things like I think one of the things that not shocked me but that Bev's her father's thing, which is disgusting and horrifying, like I think I remembered it being much more like explicitly stated than it actually is in the book, which is just kind of this disgusting horrifying thing hovering behind her at all times. And I like it better that way because it's like I think it's true to the fact that like she knows something's wrong with the way her dad's looking at her, but she doesn't understand what that means. I think that makes a lot of sense. But it does create this thing where if we don't really hit that beat enough times, then yeah, suddenly I mean I do agree with you. As much as I like was kind of like mentally preparing to get to the scene, there is that one moment where she's just like, I think I know what to do, and then she starts taking off her clothes, and then it's just like a record scratch, and everyone's like, wait, hold on, what? And like the characters all do that too. Like it's not just the readers. Like every one of the other losers is like, what? And then King almost like intentionally immediately cuts away from the scene to move to something else and do something else, and then come back to it to like build up to it with adult Bev like allowing herself to finally think back to that moment. It is like this fascinating little thing in the middle of this book where, you know, I know, you know, I've listened to what Stephen King's feelings on this whole thing are, and I think one of the things he said that I think is very fair is that everyone loses their mind over this scene. Nobody loses their mind over that when I wrote about a child being a toddler being you know, beaten to death with a recoilless hammer, and that's, you know, fair point, right? We are like kind of attuned to be really sensitive to sexual stuff and not as a sensitive to ultra violence. But like I do wonder, like flat out, if we could get like an honest off the record answer is like, would you have put this in the book if you wrote the book today? I really don't think he would. I think he would have been like, no, probably not. Like you know, I was going for a thing. I think there was a way I could do that thing some other way, and I would have done that. I really do think that's true.
100%.
Yeah, maybe he could. I tend to agree overall with the idea that if it were set up more explicitly, because even, you know, it's funny. I think Scott, you sort of gave me the softball of being like, okay, so like the blood in Bev's bathroom is her subconscious anxieties about womanhood vis-a-vis, you know, her period.
Mm-hmm.
And I was like, oh, okay, yeah, I didn't get that, but that makes a lot of sense. And I think there's a lot of that kind of stuff where it's like it's in there if you squint, and I think that one is actually one of the more overt ones where once it's pointed out to you, you're like, oh, okay, yeah. And it makes sense that she would have these anxieties because her father is hovering around, and she's constantly, like Scott just said, like aware of it, but like pushing away the conscious realization of it. So it's all hovering. I love that word, but it's not explicit, and so it feels so out of left field. Whereas if it were just like 30% more explicit, then you would be like, oh yeah, I mean, this has been in the background the whole time, obviously. So
Yeah. And I mean, Stephen King has so many stories where he has characters awkwardly describe their penis. And like it's weird that actually now that I think of it, that really doesn't happen much in this book at all.
Real dearth of penises. Yeah.
Yeah.
Um,
I mean, there was a Tumblr that I followed years and years ago that was called like Stephen King's Boners, and they were just going through every King story and cataloging anytime he talks about a boner in his stories, and there were a lot of them. And so like it is kind of interesting that like it's almost as if I think thinking about like the why of it, it's almost as if these characters were so precious to him and so innocent to him in his mind, and he knows he has to strip them of that innocence eventually because he has these adult versions of these characters, but that he really wanted to protect them from a lot of those stuff. Like it is such a to do what happens with Bev, with Patrick Hockstetter, and with Henry, to do that with those characters, and it was like, well, no, it's those boys doing those things. It's not my boys, thinking about those things or doing those things. It does. There is something to that. I think that's really interesting.
Yeah, I was thinking about the ages thing too, because Kim, I did listen to the episode that you did, by the way. So just totally confused everything.
Thank you.
So like, it makes a
Cheater.
difference that these kids are 11, and that Henry is like 13, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like, it makes a big difference. Like
Big.
the kids in the long walk, or at least Raymond, is 13, and he is a self-professed sex maniac, which is highly accurate to that age. So like, if these boys thought and behaved like that, then we would be like, ew, like, gross.
Yeah.
It would be like, everything would be different, right? So like, they have to be the young innocent children, but they have to be like close enough that I agree with what you're saying, where it's like that it's just kind of, I don't know, the wrong side of the line. But if you had done it differently, then it wouldn't have worked that way either, for different reasons. It's kind of a can't have your cake and eat it too situation in terms of how you want to portray these characters.
Yeah.
Anyway, I get what you're saying. Yeah.
It's tough because you want them to be on the verge of passing the threshold, but not past it, right? Like that's what he wants.
Right.
He wants these characters to be, and I think that's why 11, right? Is he want, like, we're about to start doing all these things, but we haven't done it yet. But then also he wants them to cross that threshold over the course of a single summer at the same time. So it's like we want to see them as the innocent, still children, still going to do young children things, but then we're also going to put them through the ringer and throw them out the other side, and then boom, they're adults now. And so yeah, I mean, I think there is a little disconnect there where, like, because there's part of me that while you were talking was like, well, why didn't he just make them 13 too? And like that would have changed a whole lot. That would have.
Yeah.
But he wants to be able to do this thing while also he wants them to be still kids, and then like at 11 you can still say kids. At 13, that's such a gulf in those 2 years of difference between what you're going through. So yeah, it's kind of a problem of his own making.
Just want to correct myself that Raymond Garrity is like 16, not 13. But I think my overall point is basically the same in terms of the difference between 11 and 13.
Yeah. So yeah, I mean, I think I'm kind of in Matt's shoes, where I'm a little, I think, more not favorable, but understanding of the scene than you are. But yeah, I think you raised some really fantastic points. And yeah, I mean, my overall stance is that he would never write this in a book today. He just wouldn't. And it's not just because the world has changed. I think he wouldn't do it because he's changed as a person.
Oh yeah, you got it.
Yeah.
All right. So can we talk about memory a little bit here? I think this is such a fun thing to talk about, because Matt and I will discuss that on the Q&A section, but I saw a question, or no, not as a question. I saw a YouTube comment on our episode last week. There was that said something to the effect of like, I love this book. It would be a perfect book for me, but the thing I hate the most is that the adult losers lose all their memory at the end of the story, and it totally ruins the story for me. And like, I had never felt that way, but I was like, that's really interesting. Let me think about that for a minute, because that is something that, Matt, I don't know if that was maybe one of the biggest surprises to you, that that they do lose all their memory afterwards, and it's not just the general forgetting of time. It is like almost magically they're just immediately start forgetting stuff. We talked last week a little bit about why we thought that was. But I don't know. I'm curious your take, Kim, like on just the concept of memory as employed by this book and how the loss of memory, like what that serves.
Yeah, I'm pretty torn. I agree that it never was a negative aspect of the novel for me, because I was like, oh yeah, they've gone through so much. It's almost like being reset. The whiteboard is wiped clean, because technically, if they would have defeated Pennywise in 1958, all of this would have been ether. And so I kind of saw it that way. But then, having gone through such a profound ordeal, and they lost Eddie, and all of these realizations with Bev, and confronting the childhood demons in the stasis that they face, like Matt was saying, to kind of lose that, it's like, oh man, this novel is absolutely built on memory, and how these traumatic memories have held us in a vice grip. But then once the main source is destroyed, we're set free, I guess, and all is able to go on in the sunshine. I don't know. I see it as the ultimate kind of happy ending, where you're not burdened by the fear anymore. But then there's also a lot of glory in overcoming that fear, kind of like there's no ultimate happiness without sadness. Like they kind of coexist at the same time.
Yeah.
And so you can't really have one without the other, because the sadness makes the happiness that much more powerful. I'm really getting philosophical about it. So I'm torn. I accept the ending, and I accept the loss of memory as being a victory and the ultimate freedom. Like, oh, all those terrible things just get wiped away. But it's like, but did you learn and grow? And who's
Yeah.
gonna pass down the stuff? Who's gonna tell the tale?
I do think that's the interesting thing, because I do think they do learn and grow. Like I think they've gone through this experience, and it has changed them, despite the fact that they don't remember what the experience was. I think the book does demonstrate that. But I agree with you. I think it goes back to like what King wanted to do with the ending, right? And I think what he wanted to do is have this beautifully, almost poetic, italicized part of the epilogue that he writes, where it's basically an ode to his childhood, and hit on that last line of where he almost remembers his childhood and the friends with which he shared it. Like he wanted to get back to that, and it almost is like magically saying you had this experience and you forgot about it, as many people do when they move on from their childhood. You were kind of gifted the power of childhood memory to relive this in order to overcome it, but like the universe is now having to write you back to the way you should be. Like you shouldn't have like really specific, strong, detailed memories of every moment of one summer when you were 11. Like you shouldn't have that. And so the universe is going to write things, and then it's going to even almost in an accelerated way, because it seems like they forget very quickly. Like the scene with where Mike calls Richie on the phone, and Richie just doesn't, like, it takes 5 minutes to pick up the phone because he's like, I don't know who that is. Who's that? Like it happens really, really fast. And that's my only kind of, explanation for it.
I like the word freedom that you used, Kim, because it is what it is it's freedom from this horrible ordeal that they just went through, involving a literal demon that they had to fight, which is this isn't something the book sort of lampshades specifically, but it's like if you had to learn that there are supernatural monsters in the world, and you had to fight and defeat one, you wouldn't really be able to live a normal life after that. So in that regard, it is giving them a kind of freedom to just be like, we're gonna erase that for you. You're not gonna remember any of that stuff. Unfortunately, you're also not going to remember your friends and this bonding adventure that you had with them. But you will carry with you kind of the more deeper lessons learned. From that,
and the love. I think the love is still there, whether or not they remember the people or not. They still have that feeling. Yeah. I do think it's also kind of a victim of King's softness and how he describes like the rules of some of the stuff, because there's that part earlier in the book where Pennywise basically takes credit for their forgetfulness. Like he says the reason they forgot everything after they left Derry after defeating him was because of him, her, I guess, it, um, and so like Pennywise takes credit for that, and then it happens again when Pennywise is defeated, and you're just like, okay, well, is this who's doing this now? And like the rules of these King universes are so malleable. It like that I think maybe leads to some confusion there. I think because maybe Pennywise was just lying and he didn't actually do any of that stuff.
Yeah. I'm left pretty unsure, honestly. I it's like 50-50 to me whether it was Pennywise doing it to protect itself or whether it was like the turtle doing it as a kind of way to protect them and keep them safe. Ka keeping its powder dry for the inevitable conclusion 28 years later.
Oh my god, that's huge.
Yeah.
Another thing, and I think I might have mentioned this at one point in a previous episode, but now I don't remember if I mentioned it or not, but it was something that was on my mind pretty often, and it borderline feels like crass to mention it because it's like this tragic personal detail about King's life, but like he witnessed a horrible thing as a child, and then he repressed it, or I don't know what the like right word is here, but he like allegedly so yeah, sorry to be like he witnessed a child be hit by a train, and then he apparently like blacked out the memory and just had no memory of it. And like, I don't know the full story, and it's like, yeah, it's like his story and it's personal, and I don't want to but like at the same time, he then grew up and wrote this story about loss of memory as a protective mechanism against terrible things happening. And I can't help but connect those things together. And even the specific character of Bill Denbrough, who like erased his childhood and then became a horror writer, like the most straightforward King insert of any King insert in any King book. So like that to me struck me as a very clear connection, or at least something that he was processing. Maybe, I don't know. What do y'all think about that?
Yeah, I like that. I think you had mentioned that before. Now that I think of it, but I do think I agree that like this is part of the reason why this book is just so incredibly personal to him. And I think all his stories are personal to him, but that he's taking this concept of this thing that he lived through himself and making it a magical force in this story to kind of explore what that means for him. Yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
It reminds me of the body as well from different seasons. I think the body was hit by a train. I don't remember. But yeah, so that was written in 1982. So I like how they kind of are blueprints for each other a little bit, especially with the friendship and the sort of boyhood translating again in this story. Yeah, there's so much hardcore evidence indicative of the pain of the past is often so traumatic it'll just turn you off like a light, and then it's years and years of processing that. It's fascinating. It's really dark and really sad, but I work with some of my students are veterans who have been in combat and seen some horrific things. And so when we write fiction, a lot of them will do like the most dense sci-fi stories you've ever read in your life where you can't figure anything out because that's what it's like inside their mind, just like a maze of stuff. And then some of them will start to write combat stories, and what comes out, it's very visceral and very powerful and very disturbing at times. But they're shocked to have those memories come forth because they don't remember the people who they served with because something so horrific turned it off for them. So it's something that I actually see quite a bit in my teaching life. So it's definitely a real thing, and I like that King explores it in this book.
I like that. The last thing I'll say about memory is one of the things that I love most about this book is that it's a story about memory, but because of the way King writes it, it is also has this ability to unlock memories. Because like this is when I read this book, it's like the closest I get to remembering the details of my childhood, not even like any specific details of like the things that happened, but just the feel of what it's like to be a child. Like that's a thing that I really don't think about very often, and none of my memories work that way. I remember events, I remember people, vague things that happened, but like the feeling of being a kid, what that felt like, and what the world looked like, and all those things are things that are just gone from my brain. But for whatever reason, every time I read this book, it transports me back to that in a way where I think one of the first things you said, Kim, is that these are like little precious 11-year-old kids, and like the world is so dangerous and scary, and I think that does unlock this feeling in you, that this almost contradictory feeling, of you are tiny in this massive dangerous world, but also you feel indestructible, like you feel
Yeah.
like you like it doesn't matter, and that is something that like is one of the joys of reading this book to me, is that it's like King can very briefly like send me back into my early version of myself, where I feel those things and they feel genuine. It doesn't feel like I'm just remembering. It just feels like, oh, this is what it was like. This is I got that again,
Mhm.
briefly here. I just think that's really cool. Do either of you guys experience that at all, or is this just me?
Oh, totally. Yeah. I mean, my oldest is the loser's age now, and so like
Oh.
a thing that I've always experienced as my kids have grown up is like little little memories being jostled loose as they reach a certain age, and I'm like, that this thing that happened just now, I remember that happening when 30 years ago, basically, right? Plus or minus. So like, and then it did that a bunch of times. The book did that to me a bunch of times, where you would have either a specific scene. I mean, in some cases it'd be a specific scene, like Ben wanting to go to the library, um, to just hang out because there's nothing else to do. I was like, oh yeah, I used to do exactly that, literally. Um, or all the way to the more general sense of just like what it felt like to be a kid. Totally, yeah. I totally get what you're saying. Like I think we actually do kind of suppress how often we were scared and sad as children, because I don't know. There's probably some protective mechanism, just like how we, Scott, just like how we forget what it is to have a newborn, um, so that you'll have another one.
Uh-huh.
Um,
Uh-huh.
I think you forget what your childhood is like, because otherwise you would you would just like be carrying all this sadness and fear with you for your whole life that's not functional, because it's
Mhm.
like, it's just like, yeah, everybody is scared when they're little because it keeps them alive, and then you get past that and then you don't need that anymore, you drop it, and that's healthy, but it's interesting to be reminded of that, for sure.
That's exactly what happened to me on the second read through, but most powerfully on the first read through, because I, like Bill, had younger siblings and I had a lot of responsibility. And so I was anxious all the time. I was such a scared little girl, and I don't know why. And so when I read it, I get to ask myself, why were you so afraid? Like, what was going on with that? Like, mom and dad were always there. You grew up in a loving, safe house. You had grandparents and aunts and uncles. You had this beautiful support system on this lovely street with flowers and bikes and schools, and like, where was the fear? And so I really get to do a little bit of psychoanalysis on myself to kind of confront little me who's mentally still in there and say, like, oh, you sweet baby, like, what was making you so afraid? And I don't necessarily know the answer. It's just, but I look back on that scared girl and she is me now. And we've overcome a lot. And I still am anxious as hell, for a lot of things, like getting on airplanes. I need Xanax, like I struggle quite a bit with a lot of things, but it's a powerful, powerful exercise that therapists use, like when you go to therapy to confront that inner child or that child. And so King is it's a very powerful therapeutic mechanism that's slowly released onto your lap, and you have as a reader, the opportunity to pick it up and do something with it and channel who you were at
Yeah.
that age. It's huge and powerful and sad and scary. And so for me, when I read this magical, magical book, I go back and as an adult, and look at myself and try and figure out, like, what happened? What's going on there? And that's huge. That's something therapy can't buy. I don't know.
Yeah. No, all the
Yeah, no,
best books
I love
are
that.
therapeutic. Yeah.
Oh
Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I think that's why I love, like, the cheesy guy in me, like, loves that ending so much, and that one quote talking about the person you were and the friends you had are not necessarily the best part of you, but once were the repository for all you could become, is such a, I love that line so much, because yeah, today you're not who you were as a child, but that, like, who you are now was in there somewhere, and who you are now, that person is in there somewhere too. Like, and I just love that idea. Um, yeah, it's a good book. It's a good book.
Yep.
um, did we want to talk about? I guess we've been going for a while, but we have to mention Derry. I think, like, we have to talk about Derry before
Yeah.
we leave here. So I guess, Kim, like, what is your how do you feel about Derry at the end of this novel? It's such a fascinating place that that King's constructed here.
Oh man, I love Derry so much. One of the things I adored on this second read through was the Derry interludes and how rich they are,
Mm-hmm.
and how King has really made it very apparent to the reader that this place ain't right. And the reason why that is goes back generations, and probably affected the native people that were there before the colonizers were there. And this just immense torture and infection of this entity that we come to know as it in this land, and soaking and permeating and haunting. And it's so huge, and it's just so strong for the reader. Like, this place is cursed as hell.
Mm-hmm.
Like, this is absolutely the most messed up place. And no matter what anybody can do, unless you get its heart, unless you seek the source and destroy it, like, this place is never going to be free. And so I love looking at the story as the losers and their journey, both the past and the present, but also looking at this afflicted town.
Yeah.
And everything that goes to, it's just beautifully constructed. And I pity Derry. I'm disgusted by Derry, but at the same time, I get it. I'm like, you guys never had a chance. You did not have a snowball's chance in hell, because he's been here. It's been here for millennia
Yeah.
upon millennia. And there's something so awesome about that. Like, the old, cursed, rotted. It's like, dang, Derry, you a mess.
Like
Yeah, I
that.
mean, if the story of the losers is kind of a story of your childhood trauma coming back to haunt you, I think Derry can be a story of generational trauma, and how that just keeps being passed down and passed down and passed down and passed down, and eventually there's just no escaping it. It's rotten to the core. I think it's really interesting in that framing, because I love that, and I love the way Derry is destroyed at the end of this novel. Is the center of it is physically destroyed, and then we're given all these kind of feelings of, and the town itself is just going to kind of die from here. Like, people aren't wanting to set up businesses here anymore. People are leaving. Like, it's just like, without that it and Derry were so intrinsically connected to each other that they cannot exist without each other. And then I just think it's so weird that he went back to in Insomnia. That, like, in my mind, it was so obviously set up that it was like, this place is just going to slowly waste away and die, and eventually, shrink until it's gone. And then we come back to it, and Derry as a city seems to be doing okay in Insomnia. I just think that's a really interesting choice, and I wish, like, I think Matt and I kind of briefly talked about this last week, and that's why I wanted to revisit it. Like, I wish I had, like, a good explanation for why that is, and I just don't.
Maybe he thought it was too optimistic to think that you could really kill that generational evil that you just described.
Mhm.
Like, yeah, you can kill the supernatural clown, but you can't really kill a town, um, short of, literally just totally razing the town,
Mhm.
um, which they don't quite do. Um, yeah,
Yeah, I
it's
like that. The idea that, like it's so they're so intertwined that even if you kill the heart, like the rotting mess of everything is still going to be there. Because yeah, I mean, we do get this feeling that like, especially in Insomnia, that like Derry is still a place where bad things tend to happen. I mean, there's this whole there's whole thing with the Crimson King and Insomnia and all this stuff going on, this crazy 90s king stuff going on. But that is still like there's some still like essential badness still in the town despite the
Mhm.
fact that it is gone.
Yeah. If we set aside the supernatural angle, which I think Kim just basically totally covered, and just talk about King's running theme about towns, set again just at a mundane level. Uh, he thinks they're bad generally, um, eh, but in it he focuses on different things than he tends to focus on elsewhere. Like, I think if you compare and contrast the way he talks about Salem's Lot in that novel versus the way he talks about Derry in this novel, it's like he's not really repeating himself. He's talking about two quite different ways that towns can be bad. Like in it, you have a lot more focus on the tendency to just fail to notice or stand up when you see something wrong. It's sort of like the opposite of standing, right? He has the theme of standing,
Mhm.
where the heroes are meant to stand, and it's like, yeah, everyone in Derry, they sit, um, they turn away, they refuse to stand at any given opportunity. They refuse to stand. Um, that's If I had to name one thing, I'd say that was the chronic malady of Derry, is just always just refraining from noticing what was wrong. And then I guess the second one would be like, uh, I think I used the word clannishness last time we talked about this, where it's like everybody's just so ready to pull together and kill the outsider, which happens over and over in these vignettes that Mike collects. Um, and these are really kind of two different things, actually, but the two of them add up to just being like, yeah, these are just human tendencies. Actually, they're not they're not supernatural. They happen everywhere. He probably observed a lot of this, in his childhood and probably throughout his life, and wants to, dress it up in a supernatural coating of paint to make it, something that he can skewer in his novel about the magic clown.
Yeah.
But that's what I think about when I think about Derry.
Yeah, like the idea that like places like this kind of just accentuate the worst tendencies in people. That we have
Hmm.
these bad tendencies, and when you get people together in this kind of situation, you kind of just those bad tendencies compound on each other and are reinforced by each other. Because yeah, I still like the massacre in the center of town. That interlude still continues to fascinate me. Just the idea that like I'm just imagining walking up to my neighbor right now, just like knocking on my neighbor's door and being like, "Hey, so criminal's gonna be driving through here tomorrow. You want to shoot him?" And like their response would be, "No, what is wrong with you?" But in Derry, it's like, "Yep, let me go get my gun. Let's go." And it's just like they don't even have to talk about it. It's just boom, it's there. It's like so self evident that there's no persuading that needs to happen. It's just everyone hears word, and we're gonna do it and go.
Hmm.
And that I think is Derry to a T. Yeah.
Hmm. Yeah.
It's something I love in fiction, the notion of cursed ground. And it's one thing that I enjoy about The Shining, but I wish was enhanced about the Overlook. Like, why are you so messed up, Overlook? And so I think King really doubled down in Derry to be like, oh, let me tell you all the ways. Let me show you how cursed this ground is. And like Matt said, it's human ugliness. And I like to think that Derry just turns it up to 11.
Yeah.
Yeah, I
Yeah.
like that. All right. Is there anything either of y'all wanted to talk about more? I mean, we could go on, I'm sure, for another 6 or 7 hours if we let ourselves. But is there anything else the two of y'all wanted to talk about before we? I think we have one discussion question that I wanted to ask Kim, and then we can answer it too. But that I think is the majority of what I wanted to cover today. But I want to make sure y'all got everything you wanted to.
I think I had one little kumbaya moment because I remember when you guys said, all right, we're going to chat about it, get ready, see you in a couple weeks. And I was like, oh my God, this is amazing. And then the phrase was, what is this novel holistically trying to do? And I kind of thought about that for a really long time. And so after my reread, I sat with it. And when I first read the book, I was like, this is about the power of friendship. And then this time I was like, no, it's bigger. It's bigger because I'm bigger. Like I'm 37 now, and a lot of the Losers Club are right around that, if not 38. And I realized that I think for me, this book is about how those dark things in life shouldn't and almost can't be accomplished alone. And that we need people, much like white blood cells need to come together in the body to heal it. And we see this a lot with addiction recovery. And after I finished it this second time around, I was just so moved by that. Like, King wants us to come together as people, as friends, as family, to defeat these dark entities, these dark things in life that don't necessarily have to be real monsters, but are really dark. And we talk about people and constant readers who have encountered this novel over time, some when they're children, some reading it for the first time at this age. And it's amazing how it reflects back to who you are now.
Yeah.
And so I was just so moved after this 1,100 page adventure of like, oh, it's community. That's what it is for me. Like it's the amount of loved ones, whether it's the family you have or the family you choose in your friends. You have to be vulnerable with them. You have to draw them near when you are at your weakest and most vulnerable. That's the only way we can win. And I'm like, this is so kumbaya, but I'm like, I don't care. This is how my heart feels, and this is why this book is so special. It pulls it all out. It pulls it all out of you. And I think that's why it's number one for so many readers out there. It's just so special. It's so sacred because this is what it does. It just puts your heart right in front of you for you to look at whether you want to or not.
Yeah, no, perfectly said. I love that.
Yeah, you've sort of made something click for me just now, actually, which I'm going to say it, even though that would have been a perfect note to end on because you've said that so well. Like you just kind of shifted something in my brain where I'm like, yeah, like because I've been picking away at Eddie as a character and feeling just like it sucks that Eddie died, and I don't feel like that was of a piece with the idea of like we're all going to face our demons and defeat them and walk away stronger. It's like, well, he's dead. He just didn't walk away stronger. But I think along the lines of what you just said, it's like it's not about like winning, and it's not about like confronting your trauma per se. I think it's almost like a verbal rut that I fall into to say that it's confronting the trauma. It's more about like becoming what you were meant to be and becoming what you're capable of being, and sort of spiritually transcending the things that have weighed you down. And that's something we see with all these characters. And Eddie, what always weighed him down was fear of death. And it was only through the awareness that he had to save his friends, again, a communal moment where he had the strength to say, I'm sacrificing my life right now. There's no other way that sticking your arm down the throat of the giant demon spider is going to end. But I'm gonna save Bill. I'm gonna save my friends, and it's through that he transcended what was holding him down his whole life. So that you have unlocked the thing that was bugging me. So I really appreciate that.
Oh my God, I'm blown away.
That's great. Yeah,
I'm blown away.
I love that. I think the only thing I'll add to that is it does make clear one of the things that not bothered me, but that I really noticed in the book, which was in 58 when they confront it for the first time, it's really just Bill, and the rest of them are there. They're like holding hands, they're channeling their power through him, but the fight against it is Bill on his own doing it by himself, and he's like, oh, look how easy this is. And there's something just inherently unsatisfying about that. And the cool thing about the 85 one is that almost immediately we know it can't just be Bill, it has to be all of them, and they all have their purpose, they all have their role, except Bev, which we talked about a little last week. I just still think she got the short stick there a little bit. But yeah, just that really reinforces the idea of community. And that's something that, like, I think we talked about Bill throughout the book, Matt, was that like Bill needs to learn that he can lean on these people, that he doesn't have to be the one to do it all, that like they've built him up as the all-powerful, all-knowing leader, and as a leader sometimes you need to recognize when you need to lean on the people around you. So yeah, no, that's the idea of it being community, I think, is perfect, especially this being like the first time I've read it in a post-pandemic world, and we were all separated from each other for so long, and how like we all went kind of crazy because of that, and there was a lot of people went through a lot of difficulty because you were so separated from your community. So yeah, I think there's really something to that for sure.
It's great.
Yeah. All right. So let's play this fun discussion question game, and then we can wrap everything up. So I really like this question, and Shenanigans directed it to all three of us. So I thought, Kim, we would make you do this as well. The question is, if it takes the form of your biggest childhood fear, what would it look like to each of you?
Oh my gosh. Wow. Probably, I still struggle with this fear. I don't want to die painfully.
Mm-hmm.
And so when I was little, the only things I were exposed to that made me think of dying painfully was to scary animals like sharks or bear attacks. So probably Jaws eating me, and a great white shark in a front swimming pool when I'm floating in the deep end. And yeah, I go under and I can't see because I didn't have my goggles on, and a shark comes and rips me apart, and I see my torso before the red water floats in front of me. I'm still terrified of like an animal attack death, or rather just being so afraid. I don't want to know I'm gonna die. I don't want to know about it.
Yeah.
So as a kid, man, friend swimming pools, as kids swim a lot, or outside activities. That was the big one. There's a shark in the pool that's gonna rip me apart.
Oh yeah, man, that just makes me think of like that. I had this recurring fear of like being in a thing slowly filling with water, like, because that's the same. Like, you're gonna die, and you just have to wait for it. Ugh,
Torture.
No, thank you. Matt, what about you? What's your it monster?
Fluke Man. X-Files, Fluke Man.
Oh,
If you know, you know. Don't look up a picture of Fluke Man.
No one's gonna listen to you. But we told them not to look up pictures of the Rat King or whatever.
Y'all know what Fluke Man is? Do I need to explain this?
I'm looking it up right now because I did not remember, and now that I'm seeing this, I see it. I remember this episode.
Yeah, it's the X-Files. I mean, there's also the Tombs episode of X-Files, which for some reason we brought a like this tiny little black and white TV with like a antenna into like the woods on a camping trip, and we watched the Tombs episode on this TV in the woods in the middle of the night. That was a bad choice. But no, Fluke Man takes the cake. Fluke Man is like, it's unclear. It's like liver fluke mutated by sewage and human DNA to become like a creature that lives in the sewer and fights people, and then like it's just really scary looking when you're like 9 years old watching the X-Files. So anyway, yeah, that's it. Very easy for it to give me probably just a heart attack, and I would just die if I saw Fluke Man.
Yeah.
How about you, Scott?
I had this recurring nightmare when I was a very young kid. I had to have been like 6 because it was still in New Jersey where I was born. And my bedroom used to be like right across the hall from my parents' bedroom in this very small house. And I would wake up in the middle of the night and I would walk into my parents' bedroom, and in the corner of my parents' bedroom there would just be this shadowy figure that would just rush me like the second I walked in. And for whatever reason, like this is the weird thing with nightmares, it's like sometimes it was just like I was clear that I knew I was in a dream and it was just scary because it was scary. And then there would be times when I would have this nightmare where it felt like real, like it like for whatever reason it was like this time it felt like all this was real and was really happening, and those were some of the scariest moments of my life. So it would probably just be this like amorphous like black shape in the corner that I can't really see that just moves really quickly. And in horror movies where things move really fast, in horror, that's the thing that always scares me the most, is like you look and there's something standing in the distance and it's looking at you, and then just suddenly like that's the jump scares that always mess me up. And I think it's for that exact reason. So I don't know how Pennywise would interpret that particular fear, but that's what mine would be.
Totally.
Oh, that's
Now I'm gonna have that dream tonight because every time I talk about it, it happens again.
Yeah, I think all little kids have the thing where they overinterpret like dark amorphous shapes, because I definitely did that too when I was about that age.
Well, and just the thing where it's in my parents' room, right? So it's like I wake up and I'm scared, and you go into the place that's supposed to be for protection, and then there in the corner is not that. Yeah.
Well, your story, your dream is creeping me out, Scott. So good job.
Yeah, I'm like looking in the corners of this room right now just to make sure. That was fun. Thanks, Shenanigans. And I think we've all scared ourselves now. Maybe we haven't moved on from our childhood as much as we thought we did. All right. Well, this was so wonderful, Kim. Thank you. This was so fun. I think we set a goal for an hour, and we're at an hour 40 right now, which tells you how good we are at time management, but also I think how much fun we were having talking with you about this wonderful book. So thank you so much.
Oh man, I'm such a huge fan of both of your guys' work. So thank you. This has been such an honor, such a joy. Thank you for the most wonderful homework assignment. I did not intend to go back to Derry this year, but it was wonderful. It was beautiful. It was much needed. So thank you both so much.
Yeah, and we definitely have to have you back. I mean, I think a perfect opportunity is Doomakey coming in just a few short months.
Oh my god. Love it.
We will definitely talk with you again, and we definitely look forward to it. So
absolutely, I'm totally coming to Bangor next summer too.
Oh yeah, perfect.
I 1000% have to go. Yeah. It's gonna be the most fun ever.
Can't wait.
Yeah. So if you for some stupid reason haven't checked out Kim's podcast yet, this is the exact time to do it. There's 2 hours of Kim talking about it available right now. On top of this hour and 40 minutes that we just talked about it. And Matt, you've listened to it. I'm sure it's great. The first thing I'm going to do when we get off this call is throw in my headphones, boot it up, and then wait for my child to wake up, which should be happening any minute now. But yeah, please check out the Year of Underrated Stephen King podcast. It is really, really excellent. I'm not just saying this because you're on the show. It's great. I love listening to it. I'm going through your backlog and loving it.
Thank you both so much. Because we're gonna keep the train rolling, but it's so helpful to have amazing people kind of throw in a cheer there, because every episode I want to quit. So
what's coming next? Do you know yet?
Oh, some hot King that is definitely well rated, because that's what this year is. We got Salem's Lot coming up next.
Wonderful.
Perfect Halloween book. It's a perfect month to read it. I'm having a ball. Next in November, we're going to read Carrie for the first time. I've never read it before. Wow. It's going to be huge. And then probably December, I might be gassed by then. So we have a really wonderful best of 2023 where I look at everything I read this year. We give away some awards: best fight scene, best hero, best villain. It's a lot of fun. So that's probably the next couple months on the Year of Underrated Stephen King.
Awesome. That sounds great. Can't wait to hear it. All right, we're back in the future now, Matt, and we're ready to answer some of these mailbag questions. We did get to answer one question with Kim, but we thought we'd tackle the rest of them by ourselves since we had to let her go to bed. We kept her way longer than we were supposed to, but
Yeah,
way
longer. Way longer.
Yeah, way longer. Yeah. All right, Matt, let's get right into it. Bunch of questions. You start, and then we'll go.
All right. Pear Jane says, Lissai, best ending ever. It's such a gorgeous meditation on growing up, nostalgia, and the beauty of leaving things behind. My favorite question to ask at the end of a book, and especially now, is what surprised each of you on this read through? Scott, what new revelation did you discover in your favorite book? Matt, what surprised you the most in reading Scott's favorite book?
I'll let you go first, Matt, and then I'll
thanks, man.
Yeah, you're welcome. You're welcome.
So, I mean, I think that I still had this sense of it from sort of cultural osmosis as, first and foremost a horror novel, which is a misconception that I should have done away with due to having read all these King books over the last few years. But and I'm not saying it's not a horror novel, of course. Obviously it is, but it has more in common with Hearts in Atlantis than it does with I don't know, Jurassic Park. I don't know. I'm reaching.
That is true.
Yeah, like I mean, you know what I mean. It's a book about it's a literary work about childhood and growing up, and what Pear Jane just said about growing up and nostalgia and the beauty of leaving things behind, and that's the feeling it leaves you with walking away. You're not like, checking your closet for the demon clown. You're thinking wistfully about your childhood. So that was the surprise.
Yeah, I think that's a great answer. I've read this book so many times that like I'm not entirely convinced like I had a brand new revelation this time around. I think the thing with me and one of the reasons why I love this book so much is it just changes a little bit each time you read it, when you space it out like I do. I think this is the fourth or fifth time I've read this book, and it seems to be every few years, and I'm always of a different age and a different place in my life each time I do it, and the way you look at it changes a little bit. And so this is the first time I read the book at the age that the losers were when they came back, which is a really weird experience because we talked about this a little with Kim, but I am on the cusp of middle age, and it's not as if I'm fully in a midlife crisis yet. We'll see. I have a couple more years before I could go full midlife crisis, but like I am definitely at this moment, like thinking back about my life a lot, my childhood. I think also having kids kind of causes you to do this. My kids are still really young, but my son's starting to get to the age where we're like watching movies with him and stuff, and he's starting to experience a lot of the stories that I liked as a kid, and that is reminding me of what it's like to be a kid. And so this is the first time I've read this book that I really had this. I am going through a thing similar to what I think the author was going through when he decided to sit down and write this experience, and it makes it a little more unique, a little different. I don't think I've ever felt as protective of the losers as kids as I had this time. I'm not saying I wanted to see them get hurt or anything, but like it was very easy for me to like imagine Bill as my son or Ben as my son or something like that, and that's a new experience for me as well.
Yeah, that's really interesting. I mean, obviously, I just to bounce off that for a second, like, yeah, my oldest is the age of the losers, and I personally, I know I've become self-parody at this point, but like going to my actual high school reunion and actually seeing my childhood friends while reading it was like, I like I've said it so many times now that it's like a joke, but it's like, no, that was actually kind of profound for me to not only meet those, not only see those people again, but have the opportunity to really meditate on that experience using this book as a kind of lens. It really was impactful.
Yeah, that's cool. I had this weird experience where I talked with one of my childhood friends on Facebook very recently, because we're both big Philadelphia Eagles fans, because that was the sports where we grew up in South Jersey, right near Philadelphia, so that's the sports teams we liked. And the Eagles are having a pretty good year, and so we just happened to. I saw him post about the Eagles on Facebook, and I responded, and we had a quick conversation. And that was in the context of this book. That was just a little weird.
That's cool.
Yeah, it is. And his poor Phillies are about to lose the NLCS and not get into the World Series, it seems, as we speak. So I feel bad for him.
Okay. All right, moving on. No, it's your turn.
Yeah. Malice in Drains says, that's a perfect name for this conversation. Are there any lines that stand out in this book or any others? I first read it over 10 years ago, but I still remember when Paul Bunyan Pennywise spots Richie and says, "Did I give you a scare, my man?" Such a casual way to greet someone you want to eat. I think of that line probably 5 times a year.
That's great.
You got any?
Favorite? Gosh. I mean, I mean, definitely. I think the one that I've thought about the most is "You can't be careful on a skateboard," which I think is great because my kids skateboard.
Oh, I didn't know that.
Yeah, their mom takes them skating, and she's taught them to skate, and she skates, and I don't skate. I'm not nearly that cool, but my kids are way cooler than me, which is the way it should be. And and we also recently got like new bikes and stuff, so like I'm constantly like having heart palpitations because of things my kids are doing involving wheels and wheeled conveyances, while they're just making it look effortless. And so I was thinking they would be shooting down the driveway on their bike, making some kind of impossible hairpin turn, and I would be thinking, you can't be careful on a skateboard. So definitely that one.
That's great.
Yeah.
I mean, I kind of already said this, but I feel like I think about the Ben coup once a year. Just like I think that's so beautiful and innocent and sweet, and I love it so much. I also really like he thrusts his fists against the posts, like that like at different times in my life has like become an internal mantra when I'm like in some difficult situation, and for some reason that pops into my head and I chant it. That's not cool. Out loud, of course, but yeah. I also for whatever reason, and I think this is probably because of the miniseries that we'll watch next week, but the "eat battery acid" line when Eddie shoots the battery acid, when young Eddie shoots the battery acid at it out of his inhaler, I think is, for whatever reason, just sticks in my head.
Sure. I like that. That's cool.
Yeah. All right. But I mean, like, there's tons of lines that are like not as memorable and quotable as that, but I think are absolutely beautiful in this book. Like the ending, the last line of this book, I think is just incredibly beautiful. But I don't think of that often because it's just not as quotable.
Yeah, I think stuff like quotable lines usually pops out more to me on the second read through. Sure. Personally.
Yeah. So yeah.
Makes sense that you would have more. All right, Das Gunslinger says, "I just want you guys to know how much I've enjoyed your content over the last year or so since I discovered your podcast. Any plans to talk about the latest adaptation of It? I'm talking about the 2022 Simpsons classic, not It. It was an hour-long episode, and I thought it had some good moments. Since you both enjoyed the Shinning episode, I'd be curious to hear your take on this Simpsonized King novel."
We didn't have any plans to talk about it like we did with the Shinning, but I guess we can do it now because I think we both have seen it, right? You did watch this.
Yes, we both did watch it after watching that YouTube video about how The Simpsons is good again.
Yeah, which is a great video, and now I have to watch The Simpsons because apparently it's good again.
Yeah.
I did not love Not It. I agree with you, Das Gunslinger, that there are some good moments in it and some moments that I got to chuckle. I actually think it being an hour long is its weakness. I think if it was like a really, really short 1 of 3 segment like the Shinning was, it just like the JPM, the joke per minute, would have been much more in its favor. I thought it was fine. There's some moments where I'm just like, this is not funny, actually.
Yeah. I mean, I feel like that with a lot of new Simpsons, even though it's allegedly good again. I think the stuff that I thought was interesting was sort of taking the story of It and then twisting it around and sort of saying different things with it.
Yeah.
Which, I think part of the reason why you and I are never going to like this as much as we love The Shining is like old Simpsons had this specific sensibility where it's doing satire in a very, very specific way, whereas this was almost not even satire. It was just like let's make it, except change it a little bit, and then they did that.
Yeah.
So,
yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, and there are some fun moments. I think, like, honestly, and like, this is my biases influencing me here, but like, I do not like comic book guy as a character in The Simpsons. Like, even in the heyday of Simpsons, I never really loved comic book guy. I just found him annoying. And like, so him being such a prominent character in this, and also kind of he's kind of the Bill role, I guess. Like, it's very loose. It's a very loose adaptation, right?
Yeah.
He just annoys me, and like, having the Bev character with comic book guy just really bugged me. It just really bugged me.
Yeah. I agree. It's I don't know. I don't have much to say about it. It didn't strike me on a deep level. I was just like, okay, yeah, I see they're changing some stuff in there, huh? All right.
Yeah. I mean, it's one of those things where, like, it's such an obvious move that a show where Krusty the Clown plays a prominent role, like, does in it satire.
Yeah.
That I'm like convinced they must have at some point in the 35-year history of The Simpsons done that already, in a much smaller way. Like, there has to have been a reference where they compare Krusty to Pennywise in like the 90s or 2000s, right? Like, there has to be.
Yeah, probably. One thing that jumps out to me thinking about it now is remembering that I kind of had a terribly wrong guess about what was going to happen in it, which is that I thought like they were going to defeat it by, instead of being scared of it, they were going to laugh at it and then use like the power of belief to turn it into a, basically laughable figure that they could then destroy just by mocking it, which I think is actually a plot line from something else, although what exactly it is escaping me right now.
Mm-hmm.
The idea of like laughing at the scary thing until it kind of vanishes. And they kind of sort of played in that space in the not it, except not quite. It was more like Krusty it. I don't even remember. I literally don't even remember. See, that's the thing is The Shining was like 7 minutes long, so you can remember the entire thing. You can't remember. You can't memorize an hour worth of not that funny stuff.
Yeah, and I think if you condense I understand it's a longer story, much harder to condense, but that's like kind of the adorable thing about The Shining is it just like it just tears through this entire story in 7 minutes.
Yeah.
And like, so it can like hit all the big beat. Like, I think there is a version of this that is 7 minutes long that just hits all the best jokes and is great. But
we should make that.
Just edit the episode down.
We should cut it down to 7 minutes. Yeah.
I guess we could try.
Yeah. Why not?
Yeah. But we do need to watch The Simpsons and probably do an episode on it, because I really need to find out if The Simpsons is good again.
Yeah, I agree.
All right, next we have Drugs Possum, who says, stupid mailbag question just for fun, but I've been waiting since season 1 to ask it. What we're told about it and the Crimson King seems to imply that they're a similar type of creature, spidery, shape-shifting, deadlights, etc. Does the information from this book change your read of the Dark Tower, Insomnia, or any other appearance of the big red fella? Matt, what do you think?
I mean, actually a little bit, yeah. Like, especially if I take seriously the idea from Insomnia and sprinkled throughout the Dark Tower that the Crimson King is a similar sort of being. It's like, what does that mean exactly? Is he the same species? Does species even apply as a concept when you're talking about Lovecraftian beings from beyond the void? Who knows? There is no answer to these questions. The point is, though, that seeing the Crimson King as a kind of creature that feeds on suffering in the way that Pennywise feeds on fear does make a lot of sense. I remember, the idea of the big combination or the vague red glow in the distance that Susanna saw, these various ideas that there was this sort of forge of suffering, the forge of the king that the Crimson King was using to almost like harvest suffering for use as a power source. That seems to go along very well with the idea of what Pennywise, is. Um, and that's about as far as I feel inclined to push it, because really we're not given enough information to say anything definitive.
Sure. Yeah.
What do you think?
Yeah. One of the questions that I would love to ask Steve when we get to talk to him, I'm just going to say when now because I'm going to actualize it into existence.
Excellent.
Is kind of a very nerdy question about the Crimson King, because I am kind of like, we talked about how the appearance of him finally at the end of the Dark Tower is unpopular to a lot of people, right? That is disappointing, a letdown. This great all powerful evil that exists kind of beyond time, like being reduced to this crazy old man that's erased out of existence by a little boy with a pencil. What was a letdown. And we, it's not that we disagreed with that. I just think we had good thematic reasons for why it made sense in the book as it was being told. But I do wonder, like, when he made that call, when he made that decision, and what he thinks about basically this question, because it's not that it matters, right? Like it doesn't matter, and we've talked at length about how King's kind of the rules of his macroverse are very inconsistent. Like, in this book, there is no Crimson King, right? I mean, there is what it is. And we're told that there's two other entities, the turtle and then some other mystical other. And that's all Pennywise knows about, at least. Right.
Yeah.
So he's not like a servant to a greater evil either. But then, in the next Derry book that exists, which is Insomnia, there he's featured prominently there. So yeah, I mean, it's inconsistent to the point where I just kind of shrug and go, yeah, whatever. But I am interested from like a world building and a story building perspective. Like, when did you decide, Stephen King, to take this evil you had built up throughout all these different stories and shrink it down? I'd be really curious what his answer to that is.
Yeah, I wouldn't be surprised to hear that he would, for him to say something like, well, it was always inevitable, because as we pointed out, the ultimate confrontation is almost uniformly anticlimactic. Like
sure,
I'm not gonna go through all of them now, but just in this one, this book probably had the least anticlimactic final showdown, in the sense that they do actually battle it across 30 years of time and realms of cosmic distance and so forth. But ultimately it boils down to Bill like squishing his way into the spider's body and crushing its heart, which makes it seem like, oh, like once you stood up to it, it was almost easy.
Yeah,
I know I'm rounding that off a little bit too neatly, but yeah, I think generally that's the direction he goes in with villains.
Yeah, I think he would also probably just, knowing King, would just be like, shut up. Just don't ask me. That's a stupid question. I don't know.
Yeah.
Not that I think it's a stupid question. I just think like this is the way he kind of treats his world building. You'd probably be like, I don't know, I was approaching the end and it just seemed to make sense to me.
Yeah. I would also genuinely accept, like, Insomnia and the Dark Tower are different books.
Mm-hmm.
They're different. Like they're just different books. So
yeah,
why are you expecting them to work as if they're the same book? They're not the same book. They're different books.
It is a kind of like multiverse macroverse world building that I think is so entirely different from the way these things are constructed now.
Yeah.
Like we've talked about multiverses pretty extensively on our other podcast, the Doofcast, and what we do like and don't like about them. But it's like, this thing was not ever constructed to be like, it's this cool thing where everything ties together and they all matter. It always, to me, it was a thing where like, it's this cool thing where you see Easter eggs from the other things you've read because Stephen King thinks that's neat, and that's about it.
Yeah, exactly. I totally agree. It's always just been him thinking like the idea of a greater cosmos that all these things are situated in is cool, but that's kind of all there is to it. It's cool.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
All right.
Good question though.
Yeah. WB Custom Cookies says, this coverage of It was so fun. I read this book when I was 14, and I was blown away by the character development and how much I grew to love all of the losers, both adult and child versions. I remember not wanting to give them up and missing them daily for a few weeks after finishing the novel. My mailbag question for all of you is, if you could meet up with any fictional character group, which would it be, besides the lovable losers? I feel like the quartet of Ralph, Lois, and McGovern could be fun, at least. At least we could get an early bird special together. Also, can't wait to hear Kim C. Very excited about that. And they say that she's actually how this poster found Kingslingers. Awesome.
Oh, that's wonderful. Yeah. Well, I hope you enjoyed that episode since you've heard it by now.
Yeah. So, do you think this means any? They say any fictional character group, not just from King.
Yeah, and I mean, I'm gonna intentionally not pick the losers because, this poster also didn't. They said besides the losers, so I will also besides the losers. But I think my answer probably would be them. But I think my other answer is boring and expected as well, which is Roland's quartet. Like, and by that I mean either of them, right? Like the one with Eddie and Susanna and Jake, or the one with Cuthbert and Elaine, I think would be great as well. I would enjoy both of those groups. Like, I wouldn't want to be like friends with them forever. Like, I don't think we'd be best buds, but just hanging out with them would be really cool.
That's a good answer. There's only one answer that's authentic to my heart, really, and that would be Leonardo, Donatello, Raphael, and Michelangelo.
I have to say, when you said there's only one answer that's authentic to my heart, my brain went like 6 different places, and none of them were that one. So well done.
I'm glad. I'm glad. I mean it though.
No, I know you do. That's why it's great. Which is your favorite of the turtles?
It's what's funny is that's probably changed as I've aged, honestly. I was really partial to Donatello for a long time because I kind of saw myself as like the tech guy, but it's like now it's like Michelangelo seems like a more obvious answer because it's like, yeah, like he's the fun guy. Obviously he would be the most fun to like hang out with. And he's also the heart of the team at the same time that he's the fun guy. So probably Michelangelo right now.
That's so funny because I was gonna say the same thing because like I, as a kid, and we this whole conversation is going full circle because we talked about this with Kim too, but I was always the Leonardo and always liked Leonardo the most, and therefore was annoyed by Michelangelo as a kid because he didn't take anything seriously and was therefore always annoying Leonardo. But yeah, as an adult, it's like, no, definitely that one. And there's like, I think there's like a teen phase that everyone goes through when they would pick Raphael because he's the edgy one. But as a 38-year-old, the edgy one would just annoy me too. Yeah. Be like, Raph, knock it off. Stop being an asshole.
Yeah, and I think I agree. Actually, Leonardo was my favorite when I was a kid. I'd probably exactly agree with you that Raphael would have been my favorite when I was at some indeterminate age. So,
yep. I love this. All right, next up we have Felidao, who says, since you both have kids, you probably hope that they'll grow up to love literature as much as you do. Are you currently doing anything or plan to do anything to instill a love of literature in them? Any specific books or book series that you intend to introduce them to? Or do you prefer to stay more hands off and let them hopefully acquire the appreciation for the reading through osmosis and figure things out for themselves? Since your kids are older, Matt, I'll let you take that one first, since you're probably actively doing stuff right now.
Yeah, I've sort of tried to have a relatively light touch because they have a tendency to push back if I push too strongly, if I push anything too strongly on them. And when I say they, it actually varies kid by kid. They all have different personalities and they're all at different ages. Um, one thing I have done is, you know, done some amount of me reading to them and some amount of audiobook with Watership Down, because I love that book so much when we had the chance to read it recently for book club.
Mhm.
And so I think we've all sort of been enjoying Watership Down together. And uh, my middle one read Jurassic Park recently, which was cool.
Wow,
Yeah,
that's awesome.
yeah. And in terms of like what I think I'm waiting. So okay, the actual full honest answer is, for me, reading Dune when I was 12 was an incredibly important transformative experience for me. And I've said this before, but I don't think I'd be the same person if I hadn't read Dune when I was 12. I think that just took whatever course I was on and set me in a different direction, in all kinds of ways. And so I'm planning to introduce each of them to Dune when they're 12. And if they bounce off it, I don't even think it'll hurt my feelings too much, because it's a pretty weird book. Um, and then beyond that, I actually have no concrete plans other than just like, giving them more and more good stuff to read, stuff that I have liked, my favorites from the book club as a starting
Mhm.
point. I do kind of really debate whether I want to try to get them into Wheel of Time, because those are super addictive books. Like, you can really get into them, but I'm like, do I want to give my kids crack cocaine, or do I want to start off with something lighter? You know, um, does does that make sense?
Yeah, sure. Yeah, I mean, I think that's a that's a great answer. I think I'm kind of on the same page with you, that I think the exact wrong way to go about this is to like pressure them constantly into reading things that you like or watching things that you like or that kind of thing. I think the biggest thing, thinking back of, I try to, when I'm thinking about this question, I try to think back to what my parents did or didn't do for me, right? And I do think one of the biggest, most important things you can do, and the thing I plan to try to do, is to just read around my kids a lot, just like
Uh-huh.
be reading a lot, because I do have a lot of memories of, my parents, sitting on the couch, just each with a book in their hands reading. And they would like, they would like, we'd do dinner, we'd clean up dinner, us kids would be playing, and my parents would sit down on the couch and they'd each read. And then like the 9 o'clock show came on. This was before TV came on whenever you wanted to, and you could pause it. So there was just usually on a couple nights a week there was a show that came on at 9 that my parents like to watch. And so they'd read up to that show, and then they'd watch a show, and then they'd read a little bit after and go to bed. And I would just being around that, like, it's like, oh, this is the reading time, so I too am going to read. And like I also, my parents did read to me a fair amount. Like, my grandfather bought me like a kid suitable version of the Iliad when I was 7. And it was really too hard. It was still too hard for me to read on my own, but I have all these memories of my dad, sitting down with me at bedtime, and we're just read a little bit of that at a time.
Yeah.
And I thought it was so cool.
Yeah.
So I think stuff like that goes a long way.
Yeah, I really, really should do more of that, because my parents did read to me a lot, and I haven't really been making the time for that, but can always turn it around. So
Yeah.
all right.
I mean, if how old is your son? And he's reading Jurassic Park already, so I think you're golden.
Yeah. Well, I'm not so worried about him.
Fair.
It's all personality based, and it can all change on a dime too. Because I
Yeah.
don't think I read all that much. I mean, I did read Jurassic Park when I was pretty young, randomly. But then it's not like I was this huge reader who was devouring giant chapter books until I was like 12 or 13, and then it changed really quickly, and then I suddenly
Yeah.
was, so.
I also think like part of it, and this is like a thing as a parent, like how do you have control over this? Another huge part of it for me was my older sister, who's 4 years older than me, was and is like a massive reader, like read constantly all the time, still does it to this day. And like, when that's one of the huge people in your life that you look up to, like you're gonna do that too. And it's like, so the goal here is, I guess, to instill that in my son so that my daughter can pick up on that and do it too.
Good strategy.
I always did feel like I was the one that read the least in my family, which is ironic because now I'm the only one with the book discussion podcast. Haha, stuck at everyone else.
You win.
But like I felt like my sister was like devouring books, like reading all the time. Like we went to the library and she'd like get like 4 books and like have them all read in 2 weeks when we'd go back to return them, and I would get like 1 and maybe finish it. So I always felt like I was behind there, but I still love to read a lot. I think the trick with reading is just find something that connects with the thing that the person's interested in.
Yeah,
and that's sometimes harder.
Well, that can be it can be hard to get out of your own way as a parent, because sometimes your kids will obsessively read something, and at least internally you're like, God, why are you wasting your time with that trash? I'm sure my parents had this feeling toward me when I was rereading The Wheel of Time for the 3rd time. Like they were nice about it, but I think there was a degree of like, hey, why don't you do, anything else other than this? And when your kids start reading like the Dog Man books or whatever, you might feel this feeling where you're like, that's definitely below your level, like whatever your level is. But they're reading and they're creating a love of the experience of reading, and then they read Jurassic Park a few years later. So
yeah, no, I think you're right there. Like my niece is a huge reader, much like her mother, and she for a while there was obsessed with these like fantasy cat books that just looked like the most ridiculous thing I've ever seen. And yeah, I was just like, can we move on from the fantasy cats? No, I think she finally has, but yeah, no, that was it for a while, and there were so many of them. There were so freaking many of them.
I think my daughter has gotten into these fantasy cat books recently. Actually, I don't remember the name of the series, but I bet it's the same thing. Yeah. Okay. Awesome. Blue Chambray Panties says, I know there's still a long way to go before the Kingslingers finale, but I'm curious about what you're going to do next. Any ideas yet on what your next project might look like, or any hints you could share at this point? Should we hit that question first?
Yeah, let's tackle that one first. So yeah, I think it's always funny because like when we posted the Bangor announcement, we were like, to celebrate the end of Kingslingers, and then we got a bunch of comments like, wait, this is ending? And I was like, I thought we told people this already.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, the plan right now is at the end of the season, which is going to be today, a year from now, if we don't miss any episodes, which surely will happen. So probably more realistically, the end of 2024 is when this whole thing will wrap up. And we've always kind of said that'll be the end of this project as it is, just because I think by then we will have covered most of the King books that I really, really want to talk with you about. And of course, I think we've already said if and when Mike Flanagan comes with his Dark Tower adaptation, we will jump right back in front of the microphones and talk about that show. So maybe not like the end, but I think we're both definitely interested in like exploring some different stuff once we get to the end of the season. So yeah, we have not, of course, decided what we're doing yet, since we still have a year. But I just recently watched the new Flanagan show, Fall of the House of Usher, and was basically like, we got to talk about this at some point. And that once again kind of drove me back to the thing that I think we've said on the show multiple times before, that it would be really fun to do just like a deep dive Flanagan podcast where we talk about all of his movies and spend a lot of time on his shows, because I think there's so much there. Not only is he very similar to King because he adapts him so often, but I just think his sensibility, the type of storyteller he is very much in line with what we talk about on the show and what we like to talk about in general.
Yeah, I totally agree. We don't want to commit to that because again, like you just said, it's a ways off before we really have to make a decision. But that does seem like a likely evolution. And just contextually, you and I have been podcasting for 8 years.
Jesus.
This is the third one of these things we've done.
Yeah.
And we also have contemporaneously been doing the Doofcast, which is just our weekly talk about movies and books and whatever else podcast for literally that entire time.
Yeah.
So we don't have any intention of like stopping podcasting if that's what you're worried about. And even if we didn't follow this up with another show, I'm sure we would continue the Doofcast. So like, it's literally just that we've run out of Stephen King books that Scott is dying to talk about. That's all that's happening here. Just
and there, I think there's, like we've talked about before, there might be opportunities for us to cover other King books, but just not in this super detailed method. Like, you know, do a King book for book club 1 month, you know?
Yeah, right.
Where instead of having 17 episodes discussing it, we have one where we just talk about it for a couple hours and that's it. And I think there's value to that, and we could definitely do that in the future. But yeah, the show as it stands right now, I think, when we first started it, I don't think we planned to do a second season at all. Like, I think I was like, we're going to do Dark Tower and then we're going to be good. And then we were both having so much fun that we kept it going, and I had a good idea for a second season. And then at the end of the second season, we were both having so much fun, and I had a good idea for a third season. Like, at this point right now, I don't have a good idea for a fourth season that's other than just, let me throw up my hands and just pick some books that we haven't read yet. And I don't want it to be that. I like when each of the seasons have like a kind of a theme that runs through them. Even if sometimes we play off that theme loosely, I still like that there's a theme.
I agree. Yep.
Yeah. So that's that. Obviously we will keep y'all informed as we get closer and closer to that date, what our plan is.
They then asked, for those of us who can't make it to the Bangor event next summer, any chance you could set up some live streams for the Robin Firth interview and other events? That'd be a great way to raise some extra money for the library as well. That's a great idea. And if we can do that, we will.
We will definitely look into that. I have no idea. One of the big things that we have to do still, as far as that, is figure out all the tech stuff with that live event, because we are going to be recording that live event and we will release it as a podcast episode on the feed. So whether you can make it to Bangor or not, everyone's going to get to hear that episode. Obviously the experience of being there will be unique and awesome, and that's what we're hoping for. That's why people want to come. But we'll look into it. We haven't thought about that before, but the hotel might not have the capability of doing that, might not have a fast enough internet speed to make that possible, but we will definitely look into that.
Yeah.
All right, those are some good questions. Next we have Steve Living Room, who says, had a blast reading It with the show. Great stuff. What an amazing book. I agree. He's got a few questions here. The first one is for you, Matt. What King books after season 3 are you most interested in reading? Do you have any?
I mean, I keep. So wait, are we on season 3 right now? Okay, after season 3. So
yes. We
plan to read Doomakey already, which is one that I keep hearing all these amazing things about it. So I want to read that one. You keep telling me not to read Pet Sematary, and that makes me really want to read Pet Sematary. I can't think of, we're doing 11/22/63 already. Yeah. So it seems like, I mean, I think this is like semi-intentional, is that we've already sort of put all the ones that I'm most excited about on the season 3 schedule. So that's, I'm mildly curious about Tommy Knockers because I've heard that it's zany, but like it's not a high priority. Yeah, that's where I am.
Yeah, I mean, look, man, feel free to go read Pet Sematary. Just don't come to me when you're mad.
No, I mean, I get it. In fact, I'm unlikely to read it because I'm like, God, yeah, I kind of know what I'd be getting into, and yeah.
Steve also asked, do you plan to read all of King's books eventually on a long enough timeline, Matt?
Well, since I plan on living forever, yes.
All right, there we go. It's a kind of a cop-out answer, but sure, let's do that. Steve also asks me, which book in my rereading of all King's book has been a pleasant surprise for you? So are we talking about like my full reread or just the books we've covered on the show? I'm gonna guess Steve means the latter. In which case my answer will be, I feel like I've given this answer before, which is a kind of a cop out, but Song of Susanna was a book that I did not remember enjoying, and I think is always the one that everyone's like, this one isn't good. This is kind of, it feels like half of a book and just a transition book. But I really, really fell in love with that book and everything they were doing with Mia in that book. So that, I think that's a good answer for me. I think Through the Eyes of Matt, Low Men in Yellow Coats in specifically, and Hearts in Atlantis broadly, was one that the experience of doing those episodes on it became something that I really, really loved a lot more than the first time I visited it. It was just really cool kind of experiencing your love for that story and that book as a whole, and it rubbed off on me for sure.
Well, I'm touched to hear that I was able to uplift your enjoyment of these things that you clearly already love. That's great. Nice.
Great. And then Steve has one more question for you, Matt. Do you like it or The Stand more, and why?
Yeah, I don't even think it's particularly close that I like it more.
Mm.
And I think it is just much more cohesive narratively.
Mm-hmm.
And I feel like much more, I feel like each of the characters is both more vivid and has a more coherent arc, in contrast to The Stand. There's a lot to love in The Stand, obviously. I mean, talked about it for hours and hours and hours.
Mm-hmm.
But it is just, firing on all cylinders, kind of just excellent example of what a novel can be. Yeah, it is the answer.
No, I expected that, but it's great to hear.
Cool. All right, the Walk-in Hard Case says, who would you guys choose to have score a Dark Tower series or movie? Can you share with us an example piece of theirs so we can get a feel for them?
Oh my gosh. I am, this is all you, man. I'm not good with music stuff.
Well, I it's interesting because nothing comes to mind immediately. Like I feel like I have, there's your composers you reach for when you want something triumphant, like, Silvestri or Elfman or whatever.
Mm-hmm.
And then there's your composers you reach for when you want something sort of like epic, like Hans Zimmer. And I'm like, I don't want either of those things exactly.
No, yeah.
I don't want any of the stuff that we're kind of used to. I want it, like, the Dark Tower is weird and dark and human, and I don't want any of the kind of, it would have to be somebody whose name I don't know, because they only do kind of weird niche stuff. Or maybe, you could take somebody like trying to think, the name is escaping me right now. I'm thinking there's this composer I like who's just particularly versatile, and maybe just kind of give them proper direction and they might be able to achieve something kind of weird and unique for the Dark Tower. Blanking on their name, and I'll probably think about it immediately after we stop the recording. But it would have to be something like that, right? It can't just be like, get Danny Elfman to do the Danny Elfman thing, or
Yeah.
John Williams,
and even like Howard Shore, like I don't think a Lord of the Rings feel is right for this either, right? Like it's so unique and different. I mean, like the thing that immediately sprang to mind for me, because I just know so few composers, would be like a Trent Reznor, Atticus Ross type thing, because they do a lot of dark films. But I could, like, this is why I could never be a director, because I just, like, when it comes to music, I'm just like, I don't know, man, just do stuff that like is good. And I wouldn't know, like, I would have no idea how to direct a composer to do their thing. I feel like maybe, like, I mean, he's dead, so this wouldn't work, but like Ennio Morricone, like the classic Western composer, like seeing what they could have done, like it's Western, but also it's all this other, like, so take the Western stuff and then tweak it a little bit would have been interesting. Of course, he's passed away, so I'm just bad at music stuff. Like we always do these Doofcast episodes and people are always like, well, what about the music? And I was like, oh yeah, there was music and I liked it, but yeah, I don't know what to say about it. It was good.
Right. I mean, I really like the music of Andor, and the composer was apparently somebody called I just pulled up their name and now it's gone. Nicholas Britell. But it's like, oh, so Andor? It's like, well, no, I don't know. I like maybe. Anyway, yeah, I don't have a confident answer for you here. It's fun to think about for sure. I just don't know.
Yeah, I'm so bad at this kind of stuff.
Yeah.
So sorry to disappoint you. I think you're probably disappointed by this answer. Next, we have Aqualungfish, who says, yay, endings. I've been excited since the start of the summer for this book, so it's a bittersweet ending, both in book and out. They say, I've been listening to old Daily Planet podcasts and Doofcasts, and there was an episode about YouTube film criticism, and I was wondering if your opinions on that have changed any. Does it seem about the same to you? Are there any people you've... what is that word?
Sorry. You're inspired by, maybe?
Okay. Are there any people, I'm just going to assume, yeah, like you're inspired by that aren't still around? Specifically, you talked about Red Letter Media. I'm a huge fan of theirs, and I've found it interesting how their shows have evolved over time, where Best of the Worst now often spent a lot of time talking about the actual filmmaking aspects of what they're watching and not just ragging on it, which was an issue you guys had back then. This is a great question. I spend considerably less time watching like video essays on YouTube about film than I used to. I think it's because a lot of the places I listen to stopped doing it. And I don't know why that is. I listened to, like, of course, Every Frame of Painting like had stopped when we recorded that episode, but I would listen to Just Right occasionally, that would do movie stuff. Folding Ideas would do movie stuff occasionally. I'm trying to think of some other ones, like Movies with Mikey. He's still going,
but he's kind of pulled back, right?
Yeah. It's just like I feel like all these places like set about a completely unrealistic schedule of where content was coming out like consistently, like more than once a month, every 2 weeks or so, and like every one of them has basically been like, hey, this is not a sustainable thing anymore and can't do this. I think the one I still watch pretty regularly is Patrick Willems, who is seemingly making like a 1 or 2 videos a month. But like all his content has got like, here's what happened with the video essay and why I don't watch it anymore, Matt. They're all over an hour long now, all of them. And I know this is greatly ironic considering this episode of this podcast is now going to be close to 3 hours long because we're talking way too much and we talked for way too long with Kim. But that's a long time to watch something versus like listen to something on a podcast. And Patrick Willems did a great video a couple weeks ago called Who is Killing Cinema? A Murder Mystery, which was like a fun twist on like taking the downfall of modern cinema and like turning it into like a fun essay that's also like a detective trying to solve a crime. It's really fun. It's 90 minutes long. It's the length of a movie. And I just don't have time to sit and watch YouTube on top of everything else I've got to do. So I missed the 15-minute video essay, I guess, is what I'm saying here.
Yeah. I don't think I disagree with anything that I said in that episode, because I went back and listened to it because I was like, what did I think about this several years ago? I definitely listen to Pitch Meeting or watch Pitch Meeting a lot more now. Mm-hmm. Which I see as like the good-natured, actually funny version of a lot of the stuff we were criticizing in that episode, where we spent a lot of time talking about how there's this negative attractor of just like negative criticism and just tearing stuff down and talking about how it's all awful. And we were just like, I kind of hate that. I feel like Pitch Meeting is like the perfect sweet spot where he's gently making fun of movies, but even even while doing that, you can tell that he actually likes the movie, and you can kind of gently laugh at the movie even though you like it and not feel like, oh, I hate the movie now. So I think he's really hitting the sweet spot with that channel. There's this other channel that I've been watching. I think it's called Local Script Man, which I like as well.
Mm-hmm.
Local.
Yeah, you sent that to me the other day, an episode, and I watched it and enjoyed it.
Yeah,
they're shorter too. So
yes. This one that I just found is 6.5 minutes long, and so he is clearly hitting the time sweet spot. I think one thing that happened with a lot of those kind of the previous generation was they tried to make that their full-time job, and then YouTube sort of cut their legs out from under them by changing the monetization policies in different ways, such that it ceased to work as a business model. So that
and I mean that's the reason why the videos are 90 minutes long now, right? Because YouTube wants that. Actually, that is like the longer the video you have, the more favorably the algorithm will be to you. And like that's not an accident. They're just following what YouTube's telling them to do. But it alienates some people, and I'm one of those people.
Yeah.
There's also just a thing where like maybe I just need to find like fresh new stuff that I haven't watched before, because like sometimes the stuff just gets old. Like I think we talked about on that video, of course we talked about Cinema Sins, but I think we also mentioned Cinema Wins, which was a channel that was specifically trying to like be the anti-Cinema Sins, and how I have great, wonderful things to say about that guy and what the work he's doing. I don't watch it anymore because I'm kind of just bored of the format now. It doesn't interest me anymore. He that guy makes a video every week. It's short format, like it's short, like 15 minutes long. They're full of funny jokes and also really inspired critique and criticism. I just am bored of the format now, which by the way is also why we're ending the show, because I think everything has a expiration date eventually. So
yep. I agree.
But yeah, I mean, I think the state of criticism right now broadly is in a really weird place. We've talked on the Doofcast about like TikTok is for the younger generations, like becoming the place where people get their film criticism and news from largely, and how I don't think that's good. I think that's bad, actually, considering how many of these people are just getting paid buckets of money by the same studios to talk about their movies. It's this really weird area right now. I don't know. There's still some really good stuff. People out there doing good work. I mean, like that Simpsons video we talked about, it was an hour long, but that was really good work. That really was.
No, I love that. I mean, I still watch Half in the Bag. Although it seems like they make those less often now, which I think is kind of part of what we were just saying, where it's like after, something like a decade of doing that, I think maybe they're just less interested in doing that now, which is fine.
Yeah.
Lots of good stuff.
Yeah.
All right.
Bent
Westward says, It is my favorite book. I read it for the first time when I was 13 back in 1989. I was blown away by it, and in retrospect, it seemed like the perfect time to read it, as I was coming of age and going through many of the same things as the Derry 7. It felt like a window into teenager issues and future adulthood that I wasn't getting through other mediums. Some of the themes are very adult and could be considered problematic by today's younger generation's delicate sensibilities. I have a 13-year-old son. Should I let him read it? Why or why not? To date, his only other King book has been Eyes of the Dragon. I do let him watch R-rated movies. He does not have a problem with violence, monsters, or blood, but he does cover his eyes when there are boobs on the screen. Thanks, and keep up the good work. I am listening back to some of your earliest podcasts, like The Weekly Planet, and man, you guys have come a long way.
Oh God. No, that means like the first ones.
Oh no.
I thought we scrubbed those from the internet.
Yeah, no. Anything that says Weekly Planet, you even if you're a completionist, you have no obligation to listen to that. That's before we even. Yeah, okay. I think I wouldn't have a problem with a 13-year-old reading it. I have debated. I don't think I would nudge my 11-year-old to read it. I think that, it's funny, this conversation that we just had with Kim a few minutes ago really made me think about the difference between 11 and 13. Like, I was a different human between 11 and 13, and I anticipate that my kids will change a lot by the time they're 13. So I think 13 is fine. I don't know. What do you think?
Yeah, I think so. I think I said I was about 13. I don't remember exactly, but I was about 13 the first time I read this book. I mean, I don't think I appreciated it on certainly the level that I do now, and all the intricacies of what it's doing, but I think it did profoundly affect me. And I think I think kids can handle a lot more than we give them credit for. I especially think, like, it seems like you're the type of parent where, if they read this book and like have a lot of questions or are trying to process things they don't understand, that you'd be willing to have those conversations with them, which I think is super important. So yeah, I mean, I think they can handle it. If they if you watch rated R movies with them, then there's nothing in this that I think is worse violence wise than a rated R movie. And also, like, I think you can handle written stuff just better than visual stuff anyway. Like, I think it's easier to handle as a kid. So yeah, let them read it. See if they enjoy it. Maybe have a conversation with them about the sewer scene afterwards.
Yeah, even the sewer scene. I mean, it's not. I think we remarked on the time that it's not very It's not a visual scene.
No, not at all.
And thus, like, if you're an adult, you sort of impute a lot of things into the scene that you're imagining because you're an adult.
Yep.
Who knows what things look like? If you're a kid, you don't know what those things look like because you don't know what they are and you've never done them. So
yep. My parents never like held back and told me I couldn't read or watch certain things. I was always allowed to watch like the rated R movies with them they were watching. And I think that creates an environment in which you do that with them rather than have them, sneak over to a friend's house and do it. Like I feel like if a kid wants to see something or read something, they're going to find a way to do it, and it's better if they do it under your purview than not.
Yep, I agree.
Like the one time in my life my mom told me I wasn't allowed to do something was play the new Mortal Kombat video game when it came out. And guess what I immediately did is find a friend that had Mortal Kombat and went and played it. It wasn't even on my radar until she said that to me.
Yeah. And the fact that when you punch a guy, blood comes out, it scarred you for life. And that's why you are the way you are.
I've never recovered from it.
Really realistic looking blood.
Oh my gosh. That's great. Up next, we have Just Stand 8460, who says, which character do you identify with most and why? I think we kind of basically already talked about this with Kim. So I'll just be quick here and say, I want to be Bill. I am Ben. And that's okay. I'm fine being Ben.
Yeah, I think Ben, just pretty straightforwardly Ben.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
For the reasons we discussed. All right, Drock704 says, why do you think it was important that they lost all memories of their time in Derry as adults after the final battle? I understand why it is convenient for certain people. Cough, Bill, cough. If they broke the hold of evil on Derry, at least it's evil, why wouldn't the power to erase their memories, if they let the town also be broken? I think we also talked about this a bit with Kim. I think my answer was basically just like, well, this is a way of being free of the burden of knowing that the world is a nightmare hell world.
Yeah. I also think it's just, like I said, is to try to more closely resemble the truth of the matter, which is the further away from your childhood you move, the less about it you remember in detail.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
It did just leave poor Eddie down in that sewer. And they forgot all about it, too.
They forgot he's there. We never hear about what happened to his wife.
I mean, presumably she's just like, my husband went missing. And that's it, right?
Yeah.
Like,
I guess so,
he just never came home.
Yeah, that's true.
And there's no body that we're ever going to find. So she's just never going to know if he's dead and where he died.
Yeah.
Awesome. Next we have eman9001, who says, okay guys, here's an uncharacteristically negative and unpopular opinion. Our next novel, Desperation, is actually my least favorite King novel. I know it's one of his more popular ones, but it just doesn't jive with me thematically. So my question for Scott is, where does Desperation rank on your personal King tier list? And then for Matt, what is your favorite King novel so far? Okay, so I'll take the first one. I've never like taken the time to rank these books. I should do this eventually. I wouldn't say Desperation's like near the top for me. I enjoy it, and I actually enjoy a lot of the theme stuff. It's talking about. I don't want to spoil it for Matt to go into details here. I also just like, as we'll get into in a few weeks, like the 90s feels like a very experimental time for King in his writing. Like, it's, he has kicked his addiction habit, and he's writing and really trying to explore different things and different kind of books. And I think that the Desperation Regulators combo is like just quintessential 90s King to me. And so I had to pick one of them. And I like Desperation more than Regulator, so I picked this one. I think it's a good book. I don't think it's a great book, but I think there's a lot of meat to really explore in there, which is one of the reasons I picked it. And we'll go into all this in more detail as we get through the book. But that's the why of it. So I wouldn't say like if it was like a tier list, would Desperation be S tier? No, probably not. I would say like low A, maybe high B tier. But it's a good book.
Cool.
All right, Matt, what's your favorite King novel so far?
So thought about this for a minute while you were talking, and I am going to kind of give the top books. I think right now the answer that is trying to escape my mouth is The Long Walk, which has actually just sort of grown on me as time has passed. And I think, prior to reading The Long Walk, I would have said The Drawing of the Three, which I still love, but it's been closer to 4 years since we read that than it is to 3. So it's hard for me to remember it as clearly as maybe I want to. But it's definitely up there. And then, of course, Hearts in Atlantis is also a contender for favorite. So yeah, that's my kind of top of my list.
Yeah, that's great answers. Long Walk is so good. It's so good. It's one of those ones that on my reread/read project, I just never truly left. It just stayed with me the entire time.
Yeah, isn't that interesting? How so brief tangent. Like you and I, we do these deconstructing director series on the Doofcast where we watch like every movie from a director, and we repeatedly find that like after watching all of their movies, our favorite is often like their first or second movie.
Yeah.
And I just think it's really funny that my favorite King book is this book that he, wrote when he was like in college. Or at least, drafted when he was in college. It's just fun. It's funny how that works. There's something raw. There's something raw about the first works that a person puts out, I think.
Yeah, you're so right. Yeah.
Cool. All right. Daniel D says, "Hi, word slingers. Reading this book again, it struck me how much tower stuff was going without saying tower. When King wrote that Eddie looked like a malnourished gunslinger with a weird gun, it made me wonder if writing it is what made him start in earnest with the tower, and also if Eddie Kasprak was a seed that sprouted into Eddie Dean in the very next book. Question is, do you think it was where he got a lot of the tower stuff, like the singing Rose and our favorite junkie, or vice versa, or is it just a coincidence? And also, I'm sure you got a list of stuff to ask Robin Firth. If you can crowbar in a is Eddie, you lot would be the best. Lastly, I ask this after every book: what does Matt think of Cy King, with one more example of his writing under his belt, and how does he rank up there with all the favorite authors, or not so much?
Okay, that's a lot. Let's see if we can parse this. The first question is basically, was this kind of a prototype for what became Dark Tower stuff? I think you can definitely tell in my mind that a lot of this Midworld Dark Tower stuff is circling around King's head as he writes this book. Like there is a lot of references and one-offs and ideas that I think are further explored in the upcoming Tower series. Like just to lay out the timeline for everyone, at this point the Gunslinger had been released, but the Gunslinger was basically like a collection of short stories bound together in a book and released basically unceremoniously. Not like this is going to be my lifetime work kind of declarative statement. That's not what it was. The drawing of the 3 comes out 2 years after this book comes out, and that's kind of where everything gets rolling. So I think so, like I think it was on his mind, right? Or
Yeah.
if we want to do in a Dark Tower parlance, he was hearing the song, and so he was writing this book, but he was hearing the song, and so a lot of the ideas and stuff kind of work their way into this story, while also being expanded upon in the future.
Yeah, I basically agree. I mean, as somebody who writes sometimes, tries to write sometimes, you can't really write about anything other than like what's on your mind.
Mm-hmm.
And I think these are just things that were on his mind at the time. These ideas, these themes, even some of these images. I think that's close to the heart of it.
Yeah. As far as, I guess we will ask Robin that question about Eddie. I don't think they're really based off each other. I think King likes to reuse names a lot, and Eddie's one of those names he uses a lot. I see them as so different from each other.
Yeah, I mean, I do. Just to play devil's advocate for just a second, like
okay.
I like the idea that Eddie Kaspbrak is actually this like strong, physically talented guy who just has been undermined so thoroughly that he sees himself as a weakling, but he's actually like a hero. He's actually like a gunslinger.
Mm-hmm.
And so it wouldn't be altogether shocking to me if like he looked like Eddie Dean. But it's like, is he Eddie Dean? It's like, well, no, he's clearly not. He's just not. But I do like the idea that there's some trace of archetype there, like the guy with incredible potential, physical and mental and spiritual potential, who has a monkey on his back. In Eddie Dean's case, it's heroin. In Eddie Kaspbrak's case, it's his overbearing mom and hypochondria.
Yeah. Okay. I like it.
Cool.
I see what you're doing there, and I'm a fan.
All right.
All right. The last question is for you, Matt. Is Stephen King your favorite writer yet? Why or why not?
I mean, he gets closer with every book we cover, I think. I think what's funny is a lot of it is because like my sense of what's good writing just changes as we talk about King more, and I come to appreciate the things that he does more. Mm-hmm. So quite unironically and not at all joking, it's like, yes, with every book we cover, he does become more and more my favorite writer. As I come to appreciate all the dimensions of what he's doing, and then come to like those things.
Yes, good.
All right.
No, that's great. That's great. Yeah. Great questions. Last but not least, we have Koalas, who says, Scott, you've mentioned several times that you're worried the slow reading experience will negatively impact your fond memories of a work. Has that ever happened? It might be recency bias, but I feel like it's only ever grown your enjoyment. That's a great question, actually. I don't think it has ever impacted my fond memories of a work. No, I don't think I've ever left one of these stories being like, I like this less now. I do think one thing that this does is it, to me at least, it accentuates the good parts of a book, but the bad parts as well.
Uh-huh.
And I think The Stand is a perfect example of this, right? I love The Stand. I love The Stand. One of my favorite books ever. But The Stand is certainly not perfect. And there are, we talked many times about some of the stuff in the middle of the book that wasn't great, or at least wasn't as good as the stuff at the beginning of the book. And when you read The Stand normally, like a normal person, you just kind of read through that stuff pretty quick.
Yeah.
But we sat with it for a long time. And we had great conversations about it and we enjoyed it. But it does just like the when you have to read slowly and analyze and talk about, like, it just tends to, if there's something you don't like about a book, it accentuates that. It magnifies it in an interesting way. And so, I always am kind of worried about that thing. And maybe I need to just let that go because it's just never happened that way. But yeah.
Yeah. The question was directed at you, but I will say, like, there have been some weeks where I come to the script and I'm like, God, I don't have anything to say about this week's reading. And then I go through the script and I add my notes, and then we talk about it. And it turns out I had a lot to say about it.
Mm-hmm.
But what I'm trying to get at here is like there are whole weeks of reading where it like the book just didn't grab me and demand that I have thoughts. And that can be a little bit, like you say, it makes you think about the book like, wow, where are we going? That being said, the fact that we then discuss it always makes me like it more. So
Sure.
I think it comes out on the net positive side.
Mm-hmm. Great. All right. So that is going to do it for our mailbag. Would you folks believe that when Matt and I sat down to record this portion of the episode, we said it's going to take 30 minutes?
Yeah. And I laughed when Scott said that, for the record. So
yeah, it's true. It's true. But we are finally done. That is it for us this week. Next week, as I mentioned, we will be taking a look at the first adaptation of Stephen King's It, the 1990 TV miniseries. And of course, from there, we'll move into the two theatrical movies that came out just a few years ago. But that's going to be our next 3 weeks. Next week, we will begin with the 90s miniseries.
Awesome. Remember, you can reach us via email at kingslingerspod@gmail.com, on x.com @kingslingerspod, or over on the subreddit at r/doofmedia.
If you're not already subscribed to Kingslingers, we strongly recommend you do so. We're going to be talking about some fun movies over the next few weeks, and then getting into Stephen King's Desperation, which I've just labeled upper B tier. So it's probably going to be hard to drum up some excitement for that. But I'm really actually very excited to talk to you about this book, Matt. And I think the reasons why will actually become pretty evident for you pretty quickly, actually.
Cool. Yeah, I'm excited about that.
Yeah.
If you like any of our shows over here on the Doof Network and you want to support us, then please consider donating to our Patreon account, patreon.com/doofmedia. Normally we would thank the patrons at this point, but Patreon changed everything again. And it's tricky for us to figure out who the new patrons are, actually.
It used to be very easy to just open a setting, and it showed me all the new patrons since the last time I checked. And they changed it, and it's not as easy to do that. And I'm got to figure out how to do it now. So thank you to all the new patrons. You know who you are. We will work on figuring out a better way to shout those people out.
Yep.
Of course, if you cannot afford to donate, that is absolutely okay. You can continue to help us out by sharing this podcast and letting people know about the work we're doing here. Please do. You can, of course, also help us by leaving a rating and a review on Apple Podcasts or anywhere else. There are reviews for podcasts. No new review to read this week, so if you've been holding off on your review, now would be a great time, because we do like to read these reviews. So please send them in.
That's right.
All right, folks, at long last, we are finished. We will be back next week for some shorter episodes. I think that, thankfully, the next 3 weeks should probably be shorter than this episode. But we will see you then. Long days and pleasant nights.
And may you have choice.